What is the weirdest cause of death you've heard being diagnosed in a body? I'm in the medical field, so I've heard firsthand of some bizarre causes of death. One was a bee sting to the inside of a lung. The woman accidentally inhaled a bee and it stung her. Apparently, she was allergic. Took a week to figure it out. Another one was a bullet to the chest and ruled a homicide, except he had been shot 3 decades earlier. A small piece of shrapnel from the bullet wasn't removed when he was shot, but he was completely fine for 30 years. Then it found its way into his circulatory system, close to his heart, and made its way into the man's right ventricle and caused a heart attack. If I recall correctly, the man who'd shot him was sent to prison for a few years and released, but was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. Double jeopardy doesn't apply here, I'm assuming, because the person would have been charged with attempted murder or something when he shot the man, and the victim survived. But when he ended up dying, it changed the charge to murder. And the man with a very weird special interest who put a live eel up his butt, and it tore a hole through his large intestine. He died. Did an internship at the office of the chief medical examiner. A guy had decided to finish things in a river by wearing a backpack full of rocks. He was found soon and didn't have too much bloating or stuff due to the submersion. Upon examination, he had a lung infection where his right lung had disintegrated into green liquid. We removed about 1.5 liters of green fluid from his chest cavity. His left lung was fine. It was determined after looking at his medical records that he'd been to the doctor's office 5 times before he self-deleted and that this infection had been going on for almost a year until it got this bad. Numerous doctors had overlooked it. Accounts from those who knew him suspected that he had decided he didn't want to be alive anymore to stop the pain. My friend is an autopsy tech. Apparently it's not uncommon for cats or small dogs to eat the hands and faces off dead or incapacitated owners. His worst was an elderly woman who was paralyzed but not killed by a stroke, and her little dog ate all of her exposed skin before she was found. He did her autopsy after she died several hours after being admitted to hospital. Working in a nursing home and rehab. Guy essentially died from pooping. He pushed too hard, blood pressure dropped, and that was it for him. You aren't going to die from pooping, viewer. There's a lot of ongoing discussion about why people with bad hearts, limited cardiac output, and damaged vocal cords die this way. Vasovagal syncope is totally boring from a medical perspective. I don't even treat it. If a normal person faints from pooping, their heart kicks back in like it should and they keep on living, so you aren't going to die. These medical videos are always the most uplifting to do. Now all of us can go out into that big scary world reassured that we probably aren't going to number 2 ourselves to death. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Had a client charged with murder for essentially getting into a shoving match with a guy. No external bruising or scratching, no evidence of trauma anywhere. They opened his head and found a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Turns out he had a ton of booze and smack in the toxin report. The substances had constricted the blood vessels and driven the blood pressure up, and the booze had thinned it all out. When he bumped his head, slumping back, that was all it took and he blew out and was dead in less than a minute. Really sad case. I was a security guard at a hospital in Alaska. One of my duties was to bring deceased people to the morgue, so I had a key to it. Got a radio call that some patient's wife wants her husband's wedding ring back. I assumed that it would be on a deceased person. I went to the morgue to look for it. I looked all over, there was no gold ring. I even opened the coolers. There were no bodies. I then looked in the fridge. Body parts and a little igloo cooler, so I look inside the cooler. It looks like very old banana peels. I glove up and pull some of them out. Turns out this guy had gotten his hand shredded in machinery. I had to get the mangled ring off his mangled hand, clean it off, and go give it to him. Okay, so not dead body, but similar levels of weird, especially when you're just a security guard. I'm a friend of a coroner's assistant. He spent a few months there. He said his craziest experience was when a man came in, apparently expired. He was a little vague about how the guy ended up on his table with the coroner, but I'll chalk it up to being early in his career. He starts to do a standard Y incision on the torso, and then stops early on. He noticed that the guy had slightly active vitals. He looked at the mortician present and says, "Oh, frick, this guy's alive." They determined the best way to resuscitate him was to do an adrenaline shot. Now, apparently he was declared dead but had something akin to pufferfish poisoning induced to his body. Anyway, he came to, screaming like a maniac and with his chest partially sliced open. He described the whole thing as surreal. My girlfriend was a mortician, specifically for cases of self-deletion. All such cases in the state got sent here. An elderly woman with schizophrenia came in after managing to swallow her severed right arm from the elbow down, and getting halfway through swallowing the other severed arm, again from the elbow down, before dying of blood loss. These injuries were self-inflicted and there were no power tools in the room. At the time of the examination, the first arm had already been partially digested. The arms were whole, they had large bruising and rough cuts, however, it was considered a self-deletion due to her mental state. It appeared she had managed to tear off or chewed through her arms, but she would have died of blood loss far before managing to jam them down her throat, so to this day I wonder how she did it. If I didn't see the look on my girlfriend's face the next day, I honestly wouldn't have believed it. I was a police officer and helped with a case where there was this guy in his 50s who died laying on his couch. He had told his friends he wasn't feeling well for a couple of days and figured it was from some cardiac-related event. Nope. Are you ready for an irrational fear? Guy had undiagnosed hemochromatosis, or high iron, that destroyed his liver, his ongoing cirrhosis, and the liver's inability to process blood as fast as it was being pumped caused varicose veins in the lining of his esophagus. This was a decades-long process. One day, one of the more esophageal varices ruptured, and the guy slowly bled to death through his digestive system while thinking he had a stomach bug or something, only to die taking a nap. Get regular physicals, folks. I'm an apprentice funeral director, but we had an autopsy tech come to my school once to do an autopsy demonstration. He was asked this very question, and this was his answer. Male, mid-50s, presented with jaundice and other signs of alcoholism, but supposedly no history of drinking. During preliminary observation, techs noted a red liquid coming from his butt. Assuming blood, it was tested. Came back as red wine and blood. Turned out the deceased was a closet alcoholic who had given himself enemas with whatever alcohol he had, in this case red wine. The doctors concluded he'd pierced part of his colon or rectum with whatever he'd enemaed himself with and led to a bleed. Working the ambulance for a barricaded male. After an hour of standby and trying not to fall asleep, a cop banged on our window frantically to call us into the house. A guy put his shotty in his mouth but must have flinched at the last second and blew his face off. He was left with just a scream hole that was fluttering flaps of torn flesh, not unlike a predator mouth for a face. That was the only time I ever saw an ER nurse shriek at the sight of something. I worked briefly as a morgue assistant a few years back. The job mainly consisted of moving corpses and holding organs while the pathologist did his thing. By far the most what-the-frick-worthy death I've seen was a guy who'd been working in a factory, getting himself off by rubbing his eggplant on the underside of a high-speed conveyor belt that he was meant to be operating. He got caught and it tore off most of his crotch. Ruled as death by misadventure. He had bled out from a torn femoral artery before the paramedics even made it to the scene. And yes, I'm aware that there's a Darwin Award that's quite similar. That guy was in the US somewhere and lost just one of his little jewels. This guy was from the south of England and died. Presumably there's some crossover in the Venn diagram of clumsy preverts and factory deaths. Also, death by misadventure is the ruling for a death caused through non-malicious negligence or by accident in the execution of an otherwise legal act. I've seen quite a bit. Working at the OCME has been a summer job that's morphed into a side job while I've been in school. The top 3 most unusual calls I've been out on are as follows. 1. A man strung himself up and when he jumped off his apartment balcony, he left so much slack that it just took his head off. His head was on one lady's balcony and his body was on the ground. When we were there, we couldn't find the head, so we had to knock on a couple of doors where the rope was hanging past in order to find it. 2. A man died of a heart attack while tickling his pickle. The responding officers left the naughty movie playing on the television just to make it awkward when I arrived. It was a cassette. And 3, another man was sitting on the railroad tracks at a railroad crossing to end his tenure on Earth by train, which is very messy and annoying to have to pick up, mind you. But a drunk driver was trying to catch air over the tracks and killed the guy, but it threw his body off the tracks before the train came over a couple of minutes later. And as a bonus, a man blasted himself in the noggin with a shotty in his bedroom but left the ceiling fan on. You know the saying, crap hit the fan? Imagine brain matter hitting his. He basically repainted his walls with an interesting splatter pattern of brain matter and blood and pieces of his face. I tried to clean up as much as I could for the wife, although I'm not required to do any cleaning of the scene. I'm actually asked not to. Sometimes I just feel bad for people. Anyways, don't shoot yourself in the head until you turn off your fan, please. Oh boy, I do wonder if talking about these incidents in such casual terms is just something that people end up doing after a while on the job. I hope I never become familiar enough with these sorts of things to talk about them like this. Former biological anthropologist. As an undergrad, I worked for a forensic anthropologist. This is the weirdest case she had had that I got to see for myself. It was from the 1920s. My boss had inherited a coroner's collection of odd or interesting bones that he'd collected during his tenure in a major city. Back then, coroners could just take whatever they wanted from bodies without telling the families. If the family was poor or indigent or an immigrant minority, then they really helped themselves, sometimes taking the whole body. This coroner took a lot of stuff, even re-articulating some of the pieces, reconstructing how they looked when they were attached to the rest of the person. So anyway, she had this collection she inherited, and several of the pieces were designated what she calls death by testosterone poisoning. They didn't literally die of testosterone, but they all died because of stupid, risky, ridiculous actions. Think of the TV show Jackass, only with no monetary payout. The weirdest one was from early last century. A white man in his 40s who had died from sepsis, from multiple arm fractures, got in an arm wrestling contest. Why multiple fractures? Because even after cracking his humerus, or upper arm bone, he couldn't bear losing. So he just wrapped it up with some kind of splint, had a guy hold the fracture, just a crack at that point, and went for best 2 out of 3. Whereupon he snapped the humerus all the way through and broke his radius and ulna when he slammed his arm down on the edge of the table in anger. The preserved bones came with a whole story recounted in the coroner's notes. One of the lower arm bones, radius or ulna, I can't remember which, had protruded through the skin, and being too cheap or too stupid to see a doctor, the wound became gangrenous, and the infection entered his bloodstream. He died of septicemia a few weeks later. Looking at the bone, I could see all of the fractures as well as where the infection had attacked the periosteum and the bone itself, with no sign of healing. In short, stupid, pointless arm wrestling contest results in multiple arm fractures, gangrene, and death from septicemia. Labeled jokingly as death by testosterone poisoning by the owner of the anatomical collection the bones are a part of. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not a medical professional or a mortician, but I think this story is relevant to the question, so I'll share it anyway. A few weeks ago, I was driving a guy to a hospital 3 hours away. He was a truly amazing man and regaled me with a myriad of fascinating tales of his youth and previous jobs. He got on to explaining to his family how he had 2 nephews, but now only had 1. I asked him what happened. Apparently, his eldest nephew, around 28, was riding his motorbike on a weekend out in the countryside here in the UK. They found him later that day, dead on the side of the road, on a corner, motorbike next to him, with no obvious signs of impact or anything that could possibly have led to his death. It took a long time for them to work out what had happened. Eventually, they found a small bruise about half an inch in width on his temple. After some investigation, they discovered that the corner of the road had just been resurfaced and had some loose stones on top. They concluded that as he rounded the corner at about 30 miles per hour, the bike had slid from underneath him. As he rolled to the side of the road, the footrest of the bike had entered the corner of the helmet, through the hole where the visor was open, and hit him in the temple, killing him instantly. Nothing reckless, no one involved, just bad luck. Sometimes that's all you need. I'm a nurse, and this 80-year-old man had fissures in his butt and was admitted to the ICU because he shoved an entire frozen D-cell-sized maglite up his butt and perforated his bowel. He went to surgery to have it removed and later died from septic shock. The maglite, however, survived. My ex-employer was a funeral director in Nebraska. He told some crazy stories. First, how he'd found a guy dead in his laundry room, glass bottle taped to the agitator on the washing machine. Broke when the guy attempted to stimulate himself by sitting on it. End result, all of his guts were in the wash tub. Second was the self-deletion by train. The guy basically shattered like a watermelon, but his brain landed perfectly intact between the tracks. Third was lots of horse-screwing stories where guys are kicked to death and found with their pants off in the stables. And finally, drunk driving farm equipment never ends well. These were generally his answer to, "What's the coolest thing you've ever seen?" My ex-employer was a sociopath, if you haven't figured it out. My dad told us that once they had a guy bleeding out on the table from a stab wound. They stopped the bleeding, but his vitals were still taking a dive. Someone pointed out there was way too much blood. They turn him over, and it's coming out of his butt. Someone had stuck a light bulb up the guy's butt, broken it, and shanked him when he tried to escape, and the guy still escaped. They stabilized him, but he died of septic shock. This was told to us over dinner, mind you. My grandfather did some work as a doctor in Indonesia. He told us stories of people who had had pathogens living in them and eating them from the inside out, some in really grotesque ways. Some people had fungus on them that basically sucked their lives away. So, not a coroner, but it was still kind of interesting and gross. The short of it was, a man died from endometrial cancer. He had had a transplant prior. The woman who gave the transplant had metastatic cancer that had spread to said organ unknowingly. The guy survived the transplant, but cancer cells from the transplanted organ populated, and he ended up dying from her cancer. I was talking recently with a friend who was an undertaker at a funeral home for about a decade, sometime in the late 70s and early 80s. This was when they were in charge of collecting bodies directly from the scene. Someone driving on a country road in Oklahoma noticed a car out in the field. A teen girl, 16 or 17, was crying and screaming hysterically. Anyway, the car was a T-top Firebird or something like that. There was a headless body in the driver's seat, a head in the back seat, along with a guy who'd been split in half at the abdomen. This girl was hysterical, so they couldn't figure out what the heck had taken place here. It turns out the driver had been sticking his head up at the top of the car while driving, and the other guy was almost sitting on the top of the open T-top. They lost control and went off the road through a barbed wire fence. One or two of the wires went up over the top of the car and cleanly severed the driver's head and the passenger in half. My friend said it took them the better part of an hour to determine what had happened. Then he collected up the pieces and went on with his day. A man fell into a septic tank and died because of suffocation rather than drowning, found after 3 days. This was one autopsy my staff let me skip as I started to retch the moment I opened the door to the autopsy site, despite wearing an airtight mask. Yeah, there's a certain amount of indignity that I just don't want to see other deceased humans in, thank you very much. Honestly, even just reading this makes me feel real bad. Ugh. Okay, so the narrator is coming back in editing to tell you that the next 2 minutes 10 seconds are one of the most awful medical stories that I've done in my time on the channel. You've been warned. Here is a second-hand experience of something my cousin went through a few years ago. It's the frickin' weirdest thing that I've ever heard, and it's worth a retelling. I need to share this with more people. So my cousin and his best bud from med school wound up at the same hospital. His friend became a mortician, and my cousin is a proctologist. One morning, my cousin gets a call from a patient he had an appointment with later that day. The patient is asking the secretary if he could come in early. His issue was getting far worse. When asked what was wrong, he refused to explain and demanded to speak with my cousin. Now, my cousin has a terrific bedside manner, the best I've ever seen. He makes it a point to speak with his patients whenever they need to. So he gets on the phone with this guy, and the guy was just pleading with him. So my cousin had an opening and told the patient to come in during that time. The patient comes in and was sitting in the exam room. Cousin walks into the room and asks him what's wrong. Patient proceeds to strip fully undressed, get on all fours and sticks his butt out at my cousin while on top of the exam table. The guy began to explain how his butt keeps leaking crap and it hurts real bad. Except my cousin apparently immediately saw that he wasn't leaking crap at all. The guy was leaking half of his goddamn intestines. Like, half a foot of intestines was just protruding from this guy's butt and would throb and pulsate with every breath that the patient took. At this point, I wish I could say my cousin got the guy the help he needed, but before my cousin could do anything, the guy just screamed, "Just yank this goddamn crap out of me, man! Get it out!" As he reached behind himself and yanked his gosh damn intestines so hard that his butthole erupted with a fountain of blood, coating the nurse and my cousin. That was apparently the most inhuman scream that Stephen, my cousin, had ever heard that day. The guy was in so much pain after yanking everything out that he passed out and fell off the exam table, smashing his head on the corner of the chair, dying instantly. So, cue Stephen's best friend, the mortician, did an autopsy, and the cause of death was pretty straightforward, all things considered. Apparently his friend found an unraveled slinky string throughout the patient's digestive tract. Like the guy took a slinky, ate it while straightening the metal out. All in all, makes me shake in anxiety just thinking about the whole thing. Oh. My goal is to not end up in a video like this when I die. I want to die in a normal way. I always found the death of Gloria Ramirez to be fascinating. Not as much in how she died, but what happened to those around her in that final hour. Staff reported magenta-colored particles in her blood just before nurses started fainting. After the third one passed out, they ended up evacuating the ER, leaving behind just a skeleton crew that tried to stabilize Ramirez unsuccessfully. The faintings and symptoms exhibited by the staff are considered to be mass hysteria to this day. My weirdest case was this one guy who decided not to be alive anymore. It wasn't hard to figure out, but the weird part was that he and his friends were having some sort of self-deletion race. Like who could finish things first. We realized that this guy, 21 I believe, had taken a wild cocktail of substances and booze. That was his third attempt that week. We saw that our pedestrian versus train from a week before was one of the other friends in this pact. Don't commit to finishing things by train, people. It's really messy, and we have to walk like half a mile of tracks to make sure we found you all. Plus, you're forcing the conductor to live through something that will haunt him forever. But the thing that made me mad was that this guy knew he was trying to finish his mortal affairs, yet he wore 3 damn pairs of pants. And I was in charge of undressing the body. We couldn't cut the clothes off in case the family wanted them or something. Undressing a body that's already in rigor is hard to begin with. He had a pair of jeans, then a pair of Superman pajama pants, and underneath those a pair of Charlie Brown Christmas boxers. In February. I swear he did it just to annoy the morgue worker, and that happened to be me. Another one was a guy who tied off his life story by purposefully slamming into the Jersey wall on the highway. Car stopped, his body stopped, and his heart kept going. Completely transected and fell into his thoracic cavity. Then the car burst into flames. So we had a super crispy critter that came in. He was in burn position and completely blackened to a charcoal-like state. His brain looked like a hard-boiled egg, and his blood coagulated into blood jello. That was a mess. All because his girlfriend dumped him. My mum was an ME for years, and she has a handful of interesting stories. As a kid, I grew up on pictures of cadavers, and she'd sometimes ask me to go over her reports to verify that her point was getting across. Because if a 14-year-old can understand it, so can a 40-year-old, right? Anyway, I remember 2 specific instances that brought horror to my young brain and sheer joy to hers. First was a guy who ended things via throttling himself on his wife's undies, and then there was the motorcyclist who accidentally ramped himself into some woods. His head was twisted around all demon-like. What my mum was so excited to show me was that his legs, because it was a 1 in a million case. The guy had gone spread eagle and perfectly struck 2 trees on each side of him, basically snapping off his legs. My mum was so excited. "Isn't that cool?" she exclaimed, I remember vividly.
What are your unforgettably creepy moments? I saw the aftermath of what happens when a 350-pound man jumps out of a 20-story window. It does not look like what they show on TV. When I was 12 years old, my friends and I were riding our bikes through some woods down an old dirt road that wasn't much used anymore. I decided it would be cool for me to go off-road and rode off into the forest. I got about 50 feet before I got disorientated and started going towards the creek, which was in a dell down a steep hill. From there, something else I didn't know, so I crashed down the hill and hit this huge boulder collection before coming to a rest. Off toward the road, I could hear my friends calling to me, so I knew which way to go. I started over towards their voices and saw a super old rusted out car. Now, I was a huge license plate collector back then, and finding rusted out cars in the woods was not that odd of an occurrence, so I went to see if I could harvest the license plate. When I got there, I saw there were bones in the front seat and a pile of rags. It was full-on Raiders of the Lost Ark with a skeleton on a pike kind of thing. I screamed like a little girl and got the hell out of there. I told my parents later, who called the police, and after some investigation determined that the man had disappeared during a blizzard in the late 50s and was never heard from again. I met his widow and children and won an award from the town. I'll never forget that feeling. Creepy as hell. This occurred in 1981. He had been missing for 20 plus years at that point, and I am now a 43-year-old man. I have no long-term effects from this event. I remember it. I remember being scared at the time and then completely puzzled as to why finding something by accident and then telling my parents about it was such a big deal. I went in the basement and looked in the box where I thought that certificate might have been, but it wasn't there. My mom might have had it. I'll ask my sister if she's seen it. No, I didn't get the license plate. My friends and I went back after all the dust had died down and they had pulled the car out. I've not been back there in decades. The amount of time the body was there is kind of crazy to me, but it's also kind of nice, only kind of nice, that the family must have gotten at least a little bit of closure from knowing exactly what happened to him. More traumatic than creepy, but saw the immediate aftermath of an adolescent run over by the school bus next to the one I was on. It was a cold morning and there was steam coming off the body. I remember that and the spilled lunchbox. This is why they have sweeper bars on the front of the buses now to make sure adolescents walk far enough in front of the bus that the driver can see them. I have a young daughter now, and these are the things that keep me up at night. Saw a dead guy pulled out of a creek on my parents' property when I was 16. He flipped his truck while high and drunk and trespassing. He decided to leave when the cops were called on him. He didn't make the turn onto the bridge and it flipped his truck into the creek. He broke his neck upon impact. A bunch of guys tried to get him out, but the mud was suctioning him down. When the EMTs and police showed up, they got him out and he was bloated and white by that time. They put him on the rescue sled to pull him up the bank. His bloated white head was bobbing because of his broken neck. That image is burned into my brain. I used to live in a funeral home, literally in a funeral home. My parents owned it, but we didn't have enough income to really support a home for ourselves. So we took part of the building and kind of converted it into an apartment. Due to some pretty bad planning on my parents' part, we had the living room right next to the area where we kept the bodies, which was right next to the embalming room. Basically, every day I'd see a random naked dead guy or two sitting on a table right outside where I was playing. Sometimes my dad would be working in the embalming room, you know what I mean by working, and since there were pretty big windows on the door, God knows why, I would get to see almost everything, from a guy getting stabbed and having his blood let out, to the egregious stitching that would have to be done to guys coming from the morgue. But as time goes on, you just get used to it, and all of it isn't really that scary. You don't really know any of the people that you see dead, so there's no real psychological impact on you. The only scary thing is when friends of the family get sent to the funeral home. That could put a man in the mental clinic. Growing up in the funeral home, now boys, stop playing with the embalming fluid. When I was learning to drive, my father would accompany me. There was a football game in town that the rest of my family was at, but I was not going for some reason. On my way home and into my neighborhood, a fairly large neighborhood, we went past a van, a plain white van that was off, until it turned on and followed us all the way to the road that my house is on. It went to the cul-de-sac. My father took the truck to the game, leaving no vehicles in the parking area and myself alone at home. That white van decided to pull into my driveway, so I ran into my father's closet and grabbed a shooty bang bang and walked out in my front porch with it drawn at the van. That van went into reverse and backed out of my driveway faster than it came in. It was a very strange experience, and I sat on my porch for a good 30 minutes before going back inside for the night. My neighbor didn't pick up his kids from school one day, so I had to break into his house. I found him on the basement floor with no clothes on. I could tell he was still alive, but obviously there was brain damage as he couldn't form words or even move. I later found out he had a brain aneurysm and he had no clothes on because it happened while he was having some alone time. Man can't even be alone and naked in his house without being worried about a brain aneurysm. God damn. Look, I won't lie, I can be a bit of a hypochondriac. It's like, you feel that pain in your chest off and like, oh God, is it over? I was working in an ice cream shop when I was in high school, and at night, in the winter, it would only be me and another manager. It was in a pretty nice area, and behind the store, there was a giant park that got really creepy at night. That night, the manager was a girl, like myself, not too much older than me, and when we are closing, we have to do trash. We were both pretty small, but we could easily do it by ourselves. I decided to take the trash out that night because she was counting money. So I get all the bags out, and I walk outside, and in the parking lot next to the trash, there is a man standing there. He was wearing sweats, and there was just this look of hatred on his face that I've never seen in anybody before. I ran back in, locked the doors to be safe, and did some dishes thinking that I could do the trash later. I walked into the main room of the store where there are all the windows, and he was standing there in the window just looking in, and I will never forget the smile that came on his face when he saw me again. It was the worst mix of evil and complete joy. I can't even describe how his eyes were. They were filled with hate. A hate that I've never seen on anybody before. I ran into the back room with my manager, and we hid there for what felt like 2 hours until the police came. By then, he was gone, of course. However, he was arrested a few weeks later for the brutal assault and killing of a girl my stature and hair color. Obviously, I don't know anything about this, and I'm so sorry you went through that. I'm sorry for a lot of the people that go through some of the stuff that they do on this, but that sounds absolutely terrifying. I was just saying the other day how crazy and just downright petty some of the motives that people have for doing certain heinous and brutal things to other people are. I was flying to India, and we had just stopped in Germany. I was 14 and sitting next to this old guy who I thought was asleep the whole time. I shake him because we landed, because he was kind of laying on me, No response. I was an unaccompanied minor, so when the stewardess came to get me, she looked at him, checked his pulse, and then everyone was ordered to stay where they were, including me. The paramedics came and declared him dead. I never knew for how long. I had never seen a dead guy up close before and was surprised at the time. I thought he would smell of something rotten when he died or would make a noise or something beforehand. To this day, I always think if I had noticed earlier, I could have helped him. I also had a dead guy lay on my shoulder for 8 hours and I fell asleep during that flight as well, so there was a good chance I used his head as a pillow while I slept. Creepy, but that's life. Once when I was like 10 years old, my dad was unemployed and we were struggling for a few months financially, and some kid in school called me a broke bum over something I don't even remember, and he told me to buy some decent clothes and that I looked like a hobo. It wasn't that bad, he was just saying stuff to hurt me. That really struck a nerve, so after school I walked up to him while he was sitting on his bike and I punched him so hard on the one side of his head that blood started coming out of his nose and his left eye turned red. He screamed, "Oh my God, I can't see!" I just felt sick to my stomach and felt like a monster. I just wanted to disappear that moment. But he was fine after a few minutes. It's good that you felt bad. Is it an excuse? No, but you felt bad, and that's a good thing because it means that you have empathy. But you know what? On the other hand, that kid probably never grew up to talk so much unnecessary smack ever again. I say unnecessary. You said yourself, you don't know why you were arguing. You might have been the one at fault. You, sir, are an unreliable narrator. But that's okay, I am too. You seen these comments out here? They're killing me. When I was young, one of my friends was killed just outside of school in the woods. A week or so later, my friends and I were walking through them, like dumb little idiots. And we found the knife still covered in blood. One of the guys picked it up and took it back to the school. Luckily, it was a simple case and the guy was already arrested, or we could have messed up the evidence for the case. But needless to say, that was what put it in my mind that the murder had actually happened and that I needed to be more careful. When I was younger, I used to have really intense visual hallucinations. Some normal stuff, glowing orbs, floating hands, that kind of thing. But the creepiest thing that I ever saw was my own dead body on the floor in front of me wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing at the time. You know, I literally just heard this the other day, but apparently if you drink more than 6 cups of green tea a day or something, you can start having hallucinations apparently. I don't know if that's true and I do not endorse anyone testing it out or whatever, because why the hell would you want to drink 6 or more cups of green tea anyway? This might not be the caliber of the other stories here, but this freaked me out when I first saw it. So like 4 years ago when I was in high school, I used to exercise in the basement of my house, which is connected to the garage because my house is built into the side of a hill. Anyway, I'm exercising when I hear this loud clicking noise coming from the garage. I had no idea what it was. It was like 10 p.m. and everyone else was either asleep or in their bedroom on the other side of the house. I opened the door to the garage and I can't even comprehend what I was looking at. A bat had gotten its wing stuck to some fly tape and the clicking was its teeth against its bone. It was trying to bite off its arm. The clicking was so loud. I'm picturing it, the imagery, the darkness. It sounds creepy as hell. Hell, I remember one time I walked into my kitchen, got this weird colored LED light thing in it, and I turn it on, pitch black room turns to pure red, scared the crap out of me. But this is way creepier. The bat, the imagery, the darkness, the lateness, it's all perfect. It's way scarier than my thing. Back in college, a junkie broke a window to get into my apartment, stole some stuff, a camera, some of my roommate's girlfriend's jewelry, whatever. Called the police, boarded up the window, and started to go to bed. Until my roommate pulled back his covers and found a blood-soaked rag hidden under his sheets. The guy had cut himself on the window and hidden the rag. Still no idea why he bothered. I want to say it was his attempt at hiding DNA evidence, but obviously it was a very bad attempt. When I was 13, me and my friends were hanging around town like usual. We went to the park first in the morning. We saw a man who looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing a hood and he had a long beard. He had a can of beer and got up and started walking toward us, so we ran. Later on, we were taking a shortcut through the library's car park to go to McDonald's, and we saw the same guy standing by some bushes staring directly at us. 2 of my friends, girls, started dancing for some reason. They hadn't seen him. It was only me that saw him. I told my best friend Walter, and we tried to get everyone else to hurry up. Walter turned around to check everyone and saw the guy in the bushes now. His fly was undone, and his dangly bits were hanging out. We ran as fast as we could, and we didn't see him any more times after that. I should certainly hope not. So this was pretty weird for me. My mom used to take me and my brother to the beach every summer for a week. Well, one year we're walking along the beach and we get pretty far. I was probably around 8 or 10 years old, so it felt pretty far to me, for whatever that's worth, to where the beach got kind of desolate. There we saw something lying in the sand. My mom just said it was a sea slug or some kind of worm from the ocean, and I bought it. Well, a few years later, I have the distinct memory of having a sudden clarence moment and thinking to myself, that was no worm, that was a man's dangly bits. Yes, someone had cut off a man's dangly bits and it somehow ended up on a beach on the East Coast. A likely story, but it might also be something that is known as a geoduck, which does very much look like a one-eyed wiggly worm. Bus ride on vacation in Greece, windy mountain road, suddenly a load of bees, then really lots of bees, then all the bees. Rounded a corner to see a truck on its side, broken beehives all over the place. As our driver sped up to get away from the bees, I'm pretty sure I saw a flash of the driver of the crash truck falling to the ground, covered from head to toe in bees. Always assumed he was not getting up from that. Death by bees is not a way I would like to go, nor is it something I would like to witness. I was on an international flight, and upon landing, the flight attendant was unable to wake the lady in the seat directly behind me. They called the paramedic upon landing, but it was obvious that she was dead. I heard them say, "She's dead." And they made us all get off the plane so they could remove the body. Perhaps not creepy, but more of a did that really just happen type of moment for me. Also, when I was 16, I saw a guy get capped. It was on Thanksgiving, and that's about all I remember about it. In comparing the two plane stories that we have where people died on them, I can't help but think, how is it on one side you had people be like, "It's okay, young man, just stay there while this corpse is on top of you," and the other one where, reasonably, "Okay, everyone just get off the plane while we get the paramedics in here." It's just different mindsets, I guess, or company process? Either way, I prefer one to the other. Not really nearly as creepy as most of these stories, but a few years ago, I was kayaking in western North Carolina. Beautiful day, pretty calm river, but the water was low and rocks were out in force. I kept having to push them off. At one point, I was coming up to a medium-sized brownish rock and preemptively tried to push off it and moved it. Thinking, that's weird, I continued to push it, only to turn around and realize that it was a dead dog. The face looked kind of mutilated, and now that I'd dislodged it from whatever kept it in place, it rode the white water and followed me down for a while. The worst part was that I kept finding them. 4 dead dogs, all seemingly killed violently, floating down the river with me, bumping against my kayak. That legitimately sounds like the worst kayaking trip ever. My friend and I had permission to go over to this abandoned house to basically loot what's left of the house and keep what we picked out. The house was empty except for junk and empty pill bottles and medication. The garage, however, was filled by the mounds of crap the previous tenants had left over. As we're rummaging through the crap and books, I find a bag filled with gun parts and triggers, lower receiver, barrel and firing pins, and a banana mag and another gun that was just missing the stock and firing pins. Gold mine. I quickly pocket that crap in my backpack and continue searching after finding this amazing loot, and I continue up into the attic. I find a small journal and a bunch of meds and needles and a bunch of government files and folders with red tape all over. The documents had redacted black lines and stuff, so all I could make out was that they had an operation initiated for deploying weapons or something. So after that, I read the journal. The journal belonged to the wife of the man who lived there. At first, it started off very dark. Stuff like he would start coming home late at night without announcing himself and would mutter and get angry. Later, he was being treated with meds for which I don't know and don't remember what meds was left in the attic, and apparently was a paranoid schizophrenic and was extremely abusive and would hurt the wife and not remember doing that a few seconds afterwards. She spiraled into depression and talked about self-deletion and stuff. Then one of her friends took her to church and it seems to make her feel better. The last time she saw him alive was when she went to get his meds refilled and later came home to find him dead by self-deletion. He had a lot of firearms and the police confiscated most of the guns. Shocked after reading it, I found another diary or book written by the husband, and it was filled with poems about his wife, life, death, etc. His poems were nice, but I always keep wondering what really happened to the guy. I don't have the diary anymore, nor a photographic memory or evidence. You'll just have to take my word for it. Well, that just made me sad. I left my pillow in the car at a hotel parking lot outside of Atlanta as a kid. I, of course, went back to go get it at night, turned a corner only to be met with a hobo touching himself. Scarred me for life. I haven't had anything too creepy happen to me, but my dad has seen a lot of stuff. He used to be an accident investigator, vehicle accidents, in Iran. He's had 2 accidents that have burned into the back of his skull. The first was a bus that had some sort of metal pole, sorry for the lack of a better word, go through the front and skewer passengers. He explained how when they opened the bus door, there was blood spilling down the steps. The other was when he was at the police station where he worked. Before I start, let me say that it was a tradition to turn your truck's light off when you pass a police station. At this station, they had a sign saying not to because it caused a lot of car accidents. So what happened was that there was this 18-wheeler driving down and he decided to turn his lights off. At the same time, on the other side of the street, there were 3 young guys, ages somewhere from 18 to 21, in a car that would resemble a Mini Cooper. They had the stereo on full blast and pretty much having a good time. As the young guys were driving, they didn't see the 18-wheeler coming their way. I guess what happened was they didn't see it and pretty much drove on the wrong side of the road. You can guess what happened. I remember my dad saying how the music on the small car stereo went completely silent right when they crashed. The 3 guys died on impact. Worst part? The truck driver came in with his food pretty much saying, "Hey, where can I go eat?" Emotionless and not caring that he just killed 3 people. My dad and the other guys working there, they were friends, took the guy into a room and beat the crap out of him. I was a 13-year-old kid sliding down the side of a gravel pit in an old quarry. The pit was located close to a private graveyard dating to the 17th and 18th centuries. On what would be my last slide down the side of the pit, a skull rolled down after me, landing with a dry rattle against the small of my back. I ran home and told my mother. I was panicking. Ultimately, the police were called. A high school teacher of mine, a man with an anthropology degree, was called in when it apparently became quite obvious that this was nothing recent. It turns out that the skull belonged to a person who had died of tuberculosis, as was not uncommon during colonial times, of being a possible victim of a vampire attack. They had been buried outside of the graveyard, face down. At some point after they had been buried for a number of years, they were dug up and some of their bones were rearranged. The rattle I heard from the skull was due to the individual's canines having been removed, and they were found inside the skull. I had no idea about people from the 17th or 18th century being like, oh, tuberculosis, no, vampire attack, and stuff like that. But there's also something really entertaining to me. It's so like, TV show-esque, I guess. Obviously, fiction imitates reality, but like the whole call the teacher from the high school with the anthropology degree, I don't know, that's just fun to me. Parents of uncool children, when did you realize your child wasn't one of the popular kids? My oldest son has always been quiet and a bit of an introvert. He's tall for his age, lanky, wears glasses, plays trombone in the school band, and is a complete computer geek. There were never any delusions that he was going to be one of the popular kids. That said, he is popular amongst his fellow nerdlings. My youngest son has always been pretty popular, especially among the girls. We have had little girls calling the house, giggling and asking to speak to him since he was in 4th grade. He's in middle school now, and I fear what it will be like when he gets into high school. My son got locked in his tuba case by the other band kids. He's not even cool among the not cool kids. I know my daughter is uncool. Why? I have no idea. She's a great kid, very outgoing and funny in that 3rd grade kind of way. She gets picked on a bit for the things she likes. Hello Kitty, Barbie, MLP, etc. As a kid, I was super unpopular too, and I tell her all the time not to worry about it. She'll find that group of friends who love her to death and want to play with her. She came home very excited last month because a new girl in school had the same Hello Kitty backpack. They made fast friends, and I hope they stay friends. A single dad is pretty cute and uber dorky like me. This topic could turn dark at any moment, so enjoy the wholesomeness while you can, viewers. My daughter has always been quick to make friends. She always has someone to play with at the park. Kids follow her around like she's their leader, and she has a blast. In school, though, she's not popular. She's the oldest in her class because her birthday is so late in the year, so she's taller than everyone, started losing her teeth before the others, and more mature than some of them. The other kids pick on her, call her names, hide her things, make fun of her bunny teeth, adult teeth that are still at that cute but a little too big for your face stage, and give her a hard time. I don't understand it. She's so popular at playgrounds and parks, but she's an outcast at school. Ah, the days of adolescent playground bullying. Been there, sister, been there. My oldest is a crybaby. I love him a bit, but he's a whiner of the highest order. I guess I realized it about when he left kindergarten. He's in 5th grade now, and he still curls up in a ball with real tears whenever he thinks he might be in trouble, even if he isn't, which he almost always isn't. I love him. But it's sad. When they reminded me of myself, my middle child loves video games and is amazing in academics and has mild autistic tendencies. My eldest loves bugs and animals and gets distracted easily. Neither one of them is prom king or queen material. The youngest is a born cheerleader. Why do I have all of those not good tendencies? I also love bugs. I also like video games, but I'm not good at academics. When he cried all the time in 1st through 3rd grade, then in 5th grade he insisted he was going to be a dragon hunter. That continued for a few years. He actually researched getting grants so he could travel to Europe to dig up dragon bones and prove they existed. Then he got into drawing swords and writing stories involving the swords. It's all good. I accepted him as he is and got him playing Magic and D&D. Now he watches anime all the time and is working with people to develop and write an online RPG in sight while doing online schooling and working 2 part-time jobs. I figured he'd never give me a grandchild, but she's due in July. The best thing a child can do is surprise and make proud a good parent who's always supported them. I don't know if she's uncool yet because she's too little, but I witnessed a situation that brought up a lot of feelings. My 4-year-old daughter went to a birthday party of some little girl from her kindergarten. They had these mini blow-up jumping castles. I noticed 2 little girls standing at the entrance of one that blocked it when my daughter tried to get in and made up some rule about why she couldn't. I did laugh my butt off when my daughter immediately thought, screw it, and just ran around and back to the other entrance, but the girls got up and went to the other one when my daughter hopped in, leaving her in there alone. I got really depressed just watching her play by herself and the other girls being mean. Part of me wanted to deflate the other castle, sealing the little girls in a rubbery tomb. The other wanted to run over and just hug my daughter and never let go. Needless to say, I bought her a lot of lollies and played with her like crazy after the party. But then, a few days later when I dropped her off at kindergarten, some of the girls called out to her and ran over and started playing. I can't figure out toddler social dynamics. There is a 10-year difference between me and my youngest brother, and I first noticed that he was just not a cool person when I picked him up from school and found out that he has a tendency to hiss like a cat at people when they said something he didn't like. God, I love the little weirdo. I'm an older sister by 8 years, and I noticed my middle school sister wasn't popular simply on the basis she got bullied so much that she had to hide in the library during lunch, and she takes an odd route home to avoid the kids who actually corner her on the way home. She's the extremely shy type, and the butthole kids don't really help that. They stole her lunch and spit in it once apparently, and she came home depressed one day because of it. Sometime around middle school, it became apparent that regardless of who she tried to be friends with or how much effort she put into being social, she was always the odd one out, always the friend and never the best friend. No one calls her to hang out or go anywhere. She doesn't date. I still haven't figured out why, unless it is basic, not wanting to be seen with someone who might be a lesbian. This is the southern US after all. It's killing her. It's killing me to see how isolated and left out she is. She's nearly done with high school, and I can only hope that college will be better. For now, she has an online group she considers friends. There's that, at least. I can't deny that when I was young, it took me a lot of time to learn how to socialize a lot better with people in person, but until that point, I had a lot of online friends and interactions that really did help keep me going. It does make me sad to think that without the interconnectivity of the internet, some people would just be completely alone, and that thought honestly breaks my heart. It's why I try to be as nice as possible to people where and when I can. My son, who is almost 15, has several learning disabilities, ADD, dyspraxia, and mild Asperger's. He finds it very difficult to make friends and keep them. He also struggles with low self-esteem. I've tried to get him into all sorts of different hobbies, but he's not interested. The only thing he loves is video games, to the point that he could easily play them for 15 hours a day. He also has a very offbeat humor, which most people don't get. I love him to bits because he's my son and his heart is in the right place, but I do worry about how he's going to get through life and form healthy friendships and relationships. Man, parents have so much to worry about when they have kids. kids and stuff, and it totally makes sense. But like, even when I was a kid in high school, I was going through a point where I thought, man, I'm never gonna make friends. But I was lucky enough to meet people that appreciated and loved me and just generally helped me become the person I am today. And hell, I ain't no success story, but I certainly like who I am, at least on the best of days. But that's one of the hardest things in life, growing up and learning to love yourself. I had 6 children, 5 girls and a boy. Some were popular and some weren't. My unpopular, kind of reserved and socially awkward during primary school son is in med school and will be a doctor next year. I don't think popularity is necessarily a good criteria for judging how your child is doing. In some classes, the kind of behavior that allows you to fit into a class and be popular are not all that positive, such as bullying more vulnerable children. I think the most important thing is for children to be true to themselves and who they are, and not compromise that to fit in. Hopefully they will find friends who are like them. I thought it was interesting that the creators of South Park were nerdy kids who didn't fit in. Sometimes the most successful school children are not all that successful when it comes to real life, and the children who are strong enough to be themselves can be quite successful. That is certainly true in some cases, but sometimes not. This isn't really what this is about, but I'm glad that they brought it up. My youngest son is a future neckbeard. He's a great kid and very active in Boy Scouts. He's 14 and only needs a few things to get his eagle. He can easily achieve it before 16. He's good in math and science and very well spoken when something interests him. He can explain plants and trees and geology of an area to younger Scouts on a level far above the average 14-year-old. But outside of Scouts, he is very socially awkward. He has a hard time making friends. Unless they are Scouts or gamers, he's overweight but not morbidly obese, and I guess average looks. I wish more of my wife's genes had kicked in. At home, it's all Xbox and computers. He has no interest in the outside world. If I ask, hey, let's go walk the dog down by the river, I just get, no, I don't feel like it. If I'm working in the yard on a hot day and my wife says, why don't you go and see if your dad could use some help? His reply is usually, if he needs me, he'll come get me. He's had his few middle school girlfriends that we all know are counted in weeks, but when they break up, he's devastated and becomes recluse for a while. His room is generally clean, but it smells of feet and butt. He won't shower or change clothes unless we tell him to. We actually held off to see how long he would do it. He wore the same t-shirt for 5 days over summer break. I didn't ask about underwear and socks. We just explained it and told him to go shower and change. A lot of these stories are really old and I'm just sat here like, man, I want to know how these people turned out. Like, did they surprise them? Yes? No? I hope so. I realized when we moved to a community with its own playground. My daughter is 5. She's so loving and sweet and very intelligent, but she's not good at making friends. She has no problem asking anyone to play, but most of the kids immediately shut her down and walk away. I have no clue why. Sometimes they'll give her some bullcrap line about her having to stay in the ice castle, which is one corner of the playground. She asks if she can come out, but they tell her no, and then they go off by themselves. So she sits there, dejected and defeated. She's such a genuinely good child and a good person, and I don't know why the other kids treat her like they do. I remember the same thing happening to me when I was her age. Kids can be so cruel. I knew before kindergarten that our son was not cool. He's an artsy, strange, nerdy kid that is bad at sports. He couldn't catch a ball when all the other boys could. He's also brilliant, has near perfect pitch, can tell a joke better than anyone his age, and is particularly empathetic. He always consoles whoever is having a bad day. One of the aspects that clued me into his wonderful nerdiness is that he'd construct a pretend world with all sorts of characters and scenarios, and could not understand why the other kids, excepting a few like-minded lovable oddballs, did not want to participate. He's picked on. It is amazing how cruel 5-year-old children can be. He's the target of the alpha male types. Until 2nd grade, he did not realize that he was uncool, but then it hit him. He's now 10 and in 4th grade. His teachers tell us that he is well liked, but he does not have any friends, which my wife sees as a problem, but I don't. He asked me once when he was 7 why other kids didn't like him. I pointed out that a lot of people like him, just that the cool kids didn't want to include him in their clique. And that's okay. I let him know that neither his mother or I were ever cool, and we've done okay for ourselves in this world. Aside from being a total geek for old school Mega Man, my 11-year-old is crazy proper and very white in an almost all-black school. He gets called Whitey constantly, and kids from the bus have beat the crap out of him and his little brother on more than a few occasions. He will now choke anyone that puts him on the defensive, which comes off a little bit like a serial killer in training, but to the proper thing, I once got a call from the principal because my son had set up a meeting with him, stating that he needed to switch schools because these kids all have behavioral issues and I can't get an education in this environment. No snark or anything like that. He was completely on point and very upset that the teacher didn't have her classroom under control. There was an HR director hiding in my kid's body, a little off, but damn, do I like my boy. I am a much older sister, which is sort of similar in a lot of ways. I realized my brother wasn't one of the popular kids when I went to visit his school to show off the high school band program. The cute-looking, well-spoken kids tend to sit together, and so do the less cute, dorky kids. I always sort of guessed, though, because he'd always been that weird gamer kid with beta tendencies, and hardly ever got invited to birthday parties. It was just confirmed when I went to visit him. Damn, girl, slapping your brother with the beta tendencies. Cruel, cruel woman, even if it is true. My son is 10. I think I realized he's not part of the popular crowd last year. He had a sort of falling out with his best and only friend. After they stopped hanging out, I'd ask him who he played with at recess or who he sat with at lunch. And he'd tell me he played alone and sat at the end of the lunch table alone by the trash can. It broke my heart. He's such a sweet kid. Pretty sensitive, quiet, but not super shy. More of an observer. He's not the first to jump into an activity, but give him time and he'll participate. His interests have always been different than those of the popular crowd. We tried various sports, a season of soccer and a basketball camp, only to come out of those with a lesson on teamwork and how it's not fair to the rest of the team to quit halfway through the season. He's had ambitions to be a paleontologist since second grade. He can remember facts about dinosaurs that he's read 2 years ago. He's incredibly intelligent. He's also a huge Star Wars fan. His favorite is The Empire Strikes Back. We put him in Cub Scouts so he can socialize with kids who aren't into sports, but by the time he joined, most of the boys in the troop already knew each other. I try to dress him in what the kids are wearing, Hollisters, Aero, etc. He has no preference for what he wears, and if I can take away one thing that kids always single other kids out for, then I'll do it. Overall, I think he'll be okay. He's got 2 to 3 friends with similar interests. He's a smart kid. If he can get through middle school and high school, I think he'll do just fine. I wonder if he's studying dinosaur bones as we speak. My parents moved and my little sister had to start high school in a new town, and I was worried she wouldn't make many friends. I was excited when she joined a small group and started hanging out with them until she wore a fake tail to school one day. Oh dear. Spits out cereal in the morning. Oh my god, my sister's a furry! My high school age daughter wanted to drive into the city to watch a Wes Anderson film and eat at her favorite vegetarian Indian place for her birthday. We live in the rural South. You ignorant fool. What was cool 10 years ago and what was cool now have completely switched. Your daughter wasn't unpopular, she was a damn trendsetter. At my daughter's first parent-teacher conference in first grade, I asked the teacher how my daughter was doing socially. I had noticed that there was a little talk from her about friends, unlike kindergarten, and the teacher paused uncomfortably and said something about my daughter being very bright, and sometimes bright kids don't have patience for things they find silly, which sets them apart a little, but that I shouldn't worry. My daughter will graduate high school this year, and she only has a couple of close friends, one of which she's had since third grade, and even those she doesn't really see or hang out with often. My son took longer to be obvious to me because his elementary school teacher flat lied to me and told me that he was socially doing just fine and had quite a few friends. My son does normally have a small circle of friends that he's comfortable with, but he's never been and will never be one of the popular kids. Neither one of my kids are bullied. My daughter was in elementary school, but not since, and I attribute a lot of that to the way our school handles the bright kids. Starting in 7th grade, the high achievers and gifted kids, my daughter is a high achiever, my son gifted, are separated out into Honors Academy. For 7th and 8th grade, they only have classes with each other, and they do a lot of forced group work and social interaction in addition to the regular curriculum. Because they're so separate from the rest of the school, there's a little chance for them to be targeted, and they form friendships with their fellow weirdos. I had a lot of doubts when they first introduced this program. My daughter's 7th grade class was the inaugural year, but it definitely seems to have resulted in happier kids. Neither of my kids have a ton of friends or in the neighborhood of popular, but they have a niche at school and feel safe and able to be themselves, which is great. Of course, their district also instituted a character program about 5 years ago, which also seems to have had some impact on how the kids interact. With all the talk of the gifted kids curriculum, I'm thinking about Malcolm in the Middle a little bit. God, that and My Name is Earl are absolute TV gold. If you haven't seen them, definitely check them out. I've known since I met him for the first time. He's my stepson, so we first met when he was 5, and he was just the biggest little whiny brat you could ever meet. He's now almost 9 and still a bit of a little crybaby, but less so. He's had no friends at school because he's an obsessive Star Wars geek. Husband and I take blame for this. We're both huge fans, but he was named to surpass us and hit the freaky stage. It is all he talks about, and it tends to alienate the other kids. But I think what truly does it is when he acts like a Lego person. All day, every day, as long as we're not running errands, he walks like they do on Lego cartoons and holds his hands in a C shape to mimic their hands. Talks like Yoda fairly often as well. He's the kid having a great time by himself, playing all the different roles in his game. I think all this makes me love him more. He's a little awkward genius, and I wouldn't want him any other way. Oh, and I don't worry about him picking up chicks later in life because he already has a girlfriend. He tells me he hasn't gotten a new one because the girls in his new class just aren't pretty to him. Apparently, he's got some high standards. I can't deny it. I'm picturing it. I'm picturing that little boy doing his Yoda voice and doing the Lego walk, and I'm just thinking, trouble in Lego City there is. I secretly hope my daughter doesn't turn out cool. I want her to have some good, trustworthy, and responsible friends, and I want her to be a kid who likes to read, do art, exercise, and chill with dad playing video games. I have a vague idea why people do it, but there's a specific reason I read that one. So basically, the whole thing was like, because you're a cool kid immediately means you're kind of a piece of crap. That is not the case. People are not arbitrary two-dimensional things. You can be cool and be nice. You can be uncool and a total douchebag. Hell, I'm pretty sure most of the time there are like several opinions on who is actually the cool kids at school, because schools are big, especially high schools. I remember turning around to my friend and being like, wait, you think they're the cool kids? I thought they were the cool kids. But I meant it more in like, no, they're cool. They are actually cool and nice and everyone likes them. But I concur, being a dad and having your child play video games with you it's a nice thought. My daughter was in developmentally delayed classes for 2 years of pre-K, then had a special helper for kindergarten with speech every day. We moved, and in first grade she was different and could not make friends. She was received from speech, and remedial reading put her on Adderall for ADHD without hyperactivity, and she makes A's and B's but still different. Her storytelling was a little weird. I've always been well-liked but an introvert. She's an extrovert and was not well-liked. I started giving her social tips. Ask what they want to do. Let them do the talking. Ask about what they like. People like to talk about themselves. Now she has a ton of friends. So weird that it worked. I think I've always known but never cared. Popularity means nothing later in life. My only concern is that they find a few friends to hang out with at school. Man's got his priorities straight. It's not about gaining popularity or anything like that. It's having friends, true friends, and, kindling joy and all that stuff. Best thing you can do for your kids at the end of the day is make sure they're happy, safe, and you love them. I mean, damn, with all the anxieties that parents must have with raising kids, it's no wonder that you screw up in a couple of places. But, like I said, just gotta make sure that you're doing your best. People who have been on reality TV shows. What's rigged and what's not? My friend was on What Not to Wear, and I was in the audience of people who were there to react when she came out from behind the curtain with her new look. She came out over and over again, but our cheering was never enthusiastic enough for the producers. After about 10 takes, we were screaming our heads off, totally hysterical, as if we'd just seen her rise from the dead. So that part was fake. I thought she just looked alright. Sob stories on singing shows. It's not the contestant's fault. I made it through a few rounds for a well-known singing show, and they begged you for a sob story. On my very first application form, I was asked about the most difficult moment in my life, what obstacles I'd overcome to be there, had I ever experienced bullying, etc. They pretty much make you tell them a sob story. So I wrote all about my heartbreak when I ran out of coffee. I have always thought there are far too many sub-stories on those shows. My aunt and uncle were on Love It or List It. They had them record both endings and the network chose which one they thought was best. They're still in the house and they love it, but the show says they listed it. Already I don't know half of these shows and I'm actually really excited to find out about obscure or weird reality game shows or something that I just don't know about. My cousin was on a Toronto dating show called Matchmaker many years ago. She said it was completely scripted and she met her blind date before filming so the producers could go over the script with them. They were given a list of ridiculous and racy questions to ask each other and encouraged to make out if they actually liked each other or to cause a scene and be dramatic if they didn't really click. I mean, when you're thinking about all kinds of reality television that there are, dating shows are most definitely the most likely to be fake because, you know, if it's blind dating especially, like things can go wrong there. Really bad things can go wrong there. So it makes sense that they'd be like, hey, this is all fake. This is actually the guy that you're going to be meeting and stuff. My daughter and her boyfriend were on divorce court. They were not married and the show's producers helped them tailor their story, which was completely made up. To be more interesting, they are now married and since they've already been divorced, it should last forever. Some of my friends went on Cash Cab. One guy was chosen the day before and told to come with up to 4 friends to a certain spot the next afternoon. They met a producer who hailed the cab and were told they were going to a game show. They had to reshoot getting into the cab because my one friend said something like, "What are the chances we're on our way to another game show?" I have worked on several reality TV shows. Some are more fake than others, but they are all heavily scheduled and formatted, never spontaneous. I worked on a certain MTV dating show where one of the contestants tried to escape the house in the middle of the night, and one of the production assistants had to tackle him in the front yard and drag him back into the house. It's like prison. They are completely cut out from the outside world. No computer, books, phones, watches, and they are fed mostly booze. They all go insane. Also, if the show doesn't air, they don't win their prize money. This is a standard for all competition reality shows. I think I remember there being an episode of Big Brother or something, you know, back when it was like a new thing, I'm pretty sure, and they all had to like sit in a box or something for like the entire day. It was like the last person out the box wins the challenge, which, yeah, that does sound pretty ridiculous and just maddening. I have a friend who signed up to audition for a show that she thought was The Bachelorette, or something similar. I guess it's standard practice to not give the actual name of the show and just say, we need good-looking, energetic young women for blah, blah, blah. So she got called back, went through a few different interviews and a screen test. Finally, they tell her that the concept is that she will be running a pawn shop with another woman. She is a dental assistant with no experience remotely related to the pawn business. Pawn Queens ended up being on for 2 seasons and they gave her a backstory about how/why she got interested in the pawn business. Not exactly shocking, but it was pretty interesting to see that they basically looked for hot girls first, then put them into a proven concept, Pawn Stars type reality show. A friend of mine was on Shark Tank recently. The episode hasn't aired yet, so we don't know how they will edit the story to be, but they did get an actual deal with actual money from Mr. Wonderful. My father is a dealer in a particular variety of memorabilia and also fairly well known as an authenticator of said memorabilia. He was on a show featuring storage units a few years ago. The show crew peppered a storage unit with some of my father's own collectibles. The hosts found them, then brought them back to my father to be appraised. He then offered to purchase his own items back from the hosts. Was on an episode of MTV Made. It wasn't super scripted, but certain things were added to make the kids look stupid. On our episode, the producers had socks stuffed inside a kid's drum to make them sound bad, even though the kid didn't actually do that. Stuff like that. But the script had room for ad-libs, and the show was fine with that as long as nobody said anything too crazy or suggested anything they couldn't deliver on. Unfortunately, a lot of the kids on the show go back to how they were before almost immediately after filming. People can totally be who they want to be, but why apply to the show? And also, it kind of sucks when the show drops a butt ton of money on you. Our episode involved paying for an appearance from Finger 11 when they were huge, and it ends up being a waste for everything other than getting a TV episode out of it. I was on a show geared towards preteens and teenagers that tried to imitate Fear Factor on YTV. They had us compete in various unique athletic competitions and other things. Most most of it was surprisingly real. We actually did compete. Our scores were based on our performance in the task. The one thing that wasn't real was that the episode made it look like everything happened in a day, when in reality, it took about 5 days to film. Overall, it was a really cool experience that I wouldn't trade for the world. Hey, we got a nice one. A friend of mine worked as an art director on the American version of Super Nanny. She said pretty much everything was real, maybe editing together to make it a bit more dramatic, but the family interactions were genuine, and she said Jo Frost is a very sweet, warm woman who really does her best for the kids. I'm not sure if I prefer Super Nanny to be fake or not, because some of the children could be vile, and some of the parents, if I remember correctly, were kind of not very receptive to their children's needs either in some cases. Every single thing is fake. I was on a cake competition show. The judges recorded 2 takes for every comment, 1 positive and 1 negative, so the editors could put it together however they wanted. They rolled the clock back an hour so everyone else could finish. We had over 3 months to plan our spontaneous cake. Oh yeah, and while we won by the judges' vote, a producer decided one of the other cakes would film better for the big reveal, so we didn't win even though we should have. I was on Restaurants Impossible a couple years ago. They say they have a $10,000 budget for the renovation. Definitely does not mean they use it. The host, Robert Irvine, was only there for like an hour a day of the 3-ish day venture, just to get in the way and whine about things for the camera. They made up this whole story about how my boss would lose everything and cause so much stress on his marriage and family if the restaurant failed. They had us walk this direction with a sullen look to show that we felt underappreciated as employees. We had 4 employees actually walk out because of some of the comments Robert made. We also did not get paid any extra for any of this. But while all of that was annoying, I will say this. The Food Network did pay almost $4,000 for a very local construction crew to come in, which is awesome for local business and support. The food was very awesome, and I got to learn some insane techniques from the world-class chefs at the very start of my career. I am a chef myself now. It was a very neat, exciting thing for a small town and definitely brought our community together, and while the business did still end up failing a year and a half later, my boss was totally fine because he bought out another restaurant and is now a very successful person elsewhere. Kinda sucks that they feel they need to play up the drama aspect of it, but I think it's good that they at least are there to actually do some good in that case, which, a little bit of good, little bit of bad makes it more interesting. I was on an episode of Extreme Guide to Parenting. My mom is a hypnotherapist for a living, and so they interviewed my brothers and me about getting hypnotized to do chores and get good grades. They had us say things like, my mom using neuro-linguistic programming to make us do things, and that she hypnotizes us on a daily basis. I was 14 and I had to pretend that I had a crush on this boy, and my mom taught me how to hypnotize him to like me. All the parts with me in it were cut out, thank God, but my twin brothers got a decent amount of airtime. All of it was scripted. It was basically a publicity stunt on my mom's part to get more business. And I don't blame her. It worked pretty effectively, and we got a $5,000 check for letting them use our house to film. To clarify, everything my mom said was true to a degree, and she has hypnotized me in the past. But hypnotherapy is not what everyone thinks it is. It is a way of gaining more self-control, not less, and in no way is it someone controlling your mind. There are subtle cues you can give people to get them to agree with you, such as nodding your head when you ask for something, and touching their shoulder. But other than that, it is mostly used to help people stop smoking or biting their nails, and even improving concentration and avoiding panic attacks. Just like another therapist might help you, my mom does it with hypnosis. As for exploiting my brothers and me, it was really fun and I laughed a lot when I saw the final cut. I thought my family didn't seem so bad when compared to others that I saw in the same episode, but I can't judge. Either way, the whole plot was made up, but it is true that my mom taught us how to exit something called fight or flight mode when in non-life-threatening situations, like when you panic. She taught us to think clearly. Nothing as extreme as how they portrayed us in the show. Honestly, it's counterintuitive to make a show that puts my mom in a bad light for business reasons, and so while everything was scripted, she did maintain her usual air of professionalism. The directors just took all the parts that made her look as bad as possible. I'm genuinely enjoying this one because not only do I get a bit of insight as to what is actually fake in these TV shows, the entertainment factor, but also the utility chili factor, like with the Ultimate Chef Experience or whatever it was a couple stories ago. Diners, drive-ins, and dives. Kinda real. Maybe. 50-50. Friend owns a butcher shop and happens to be the supplier of meats to this restaurant where an episode of DDD was going to be filmed, and asked me to come along with him. We were part of the crowd scene where guys come around and ask other people things like, so how's the burger, etc. Thing is, not one of the people in the restaurant during that scene was a random restaurant customer. Everyone was a special invited guest of the restaurant owners. Once we arrived, the producer dude placed us in seats and they made a few people move tables and booths for a better overall crowd look, I presume. They gave us some preliminary instructions: make sure phones are off, don't ask for guys' autographs at all, don't pay attention to camera, etc. And then we waited and waited and waited. After maybe 45 minutes or so, the waitstaff just started bringing out food and placing it on tables. No one had ordered anything, but the staff just started bringing stuff out. Once a decent number of people had dishes at their table, the servers would continue bringing food out. But this time with camera peeps behind them filming them as they took plates to tables. They did some interview shots with people eating, and when I watched the episode, it was edited to look as if they were responding to something the guy had said to them, even though he wasn't around at all at this point. Shortly after that, Guy Fieri comes in and everyone applauds, and he just sort of waves his hand at everyone quickly, never smiles, and goes back to typing on his phone. Now, I had always thought Guy Fieri looked kinda douchey, but was probably a nice person. No absolute total diva douchebag the entire time, never acknowledged the crowd, barely acknowledged the production crew, just kinda seemed like a douche. Literally was standing right beside a booth where someone was sitting, and the lady sitting there said something to him like, hey, we love your show. Guy Fieri just kinda does this half smirk and smile thing and never acknowledges the lady or anyone at her booth. Only, and I mean only, when the video guy would say, action, would he try to turn on the charm and actually talk to crowds of people. Get excited and talk about the food and stuff. Later, after he filmed the restaurant scenes, they backed his Camaro out of a trailer and filmed all of the scenes where he's driving around. The crowd scenes were done at this point. My buddy and I were just hanging out and chatting with the owner and one of his managers. The restaurant kitchen scenes where they were going to film Guy and the chef prepping and making the food were filmed the day before, and the owner said it was the exact same thing. Zero interaction with Guy Fieri until the cameras were rolling. They even filmed some outtakes, which were somewhat pre-planned and set up in advance. Once the car scenes were all done, Guy Fieri heads back into the RV and we didn't see him again. The crew came around and did some other shots and interviewed some of the other staff and such. Overall, it was an interesting day. I have admittedly never had much of an opinion of Guy Fieri. Not surprising, ghost hunting shows are fake. What is surprising is how they do it. See those fancy instruments they carry that no one has ever heard of? They're actually remotes to each other. All you gotta do is split into two groups, and when one team is adjusting their settings, the other team is detecting ghosts. So simple, and you get twice the footage. Also, one time in a screening when the hunters were reviewing evidence, a producer whispered to me, see that ghost shape behind the door? Yeah, that's the sound guy. Wow. Now that's actually interesting to me. It sounds kind of fun and makes ghost hunting shows, I don't know, kind of more entertaining. If anything, that's just a good idea to be like, yeah, we're gonna prank each other or something. I had a friend who worked on the Kardashians. They were filming a huge party. It was dead. No one doing anything. The producers asked if anyone had any ideas. Friends mentioned beer pong. Producers made him act like a guest and teach the mom to play to make the party look fun. Everything was fake. I heard from a tattoo artist that he had auditioned to be on Ink Master and met Kay Cutter, season 2, and he explained that to be a part of the show, they look for personality traits and flanderize the hell out of you to make a character that can create drama to the show. Kay Cutter did actually have a criminal record, so they used that to make him the bully of that season. The tattoo artist who I was talking with claimed Kay is actually a really cool and nice guy. I have never watched an episode of Ink Masters, and this is the first I'm hearing of a Kay Cutter. I worked on the Sing-Off and ABDC for several seasons in the contestant department. The performances and the performers were all real and really cool. I listened to the Street Corner rehearse Creep on stage one day and got goosebumps from how good they were. There are decisions made by producers to increase the market value of the show, like keeping a fourth group until the final round because they didn't want to lose a key demographic from the audience. The finale was always live and based on fan vote online, so that part was real. One season of ABDC, a contestant broke his leg. That was also sadly real, as I was there to witness. Call 911, the producers, and my manager. They were concerned about getting B-roll of him going into the ambulance. He was a really sweet kid. But these shows are exceptions in the industry, not the rule, and both have been cancelled. Went to a filming of American Ninja Warrior. They filmed all night with over 100 competitors, running the course back-to-back for around 7 hours. The only ones cheering like on the show were family members on sidelines. Everyone else was kind of quietly observing. It was impossible to figure out who would make the show and who ended up on the cutting room floor. After watching the actual show on air, even completing the course didn't guarantee that your run would be shown. Several got over the break, so-and-so made it to the end of the course, cue 2-second cut of button press. The best bet to making it on air, outside of their stable of famous ninjas, was to fail on the course in a way that nobody else had. That very last bit about failing in a way that nobody else has yet, it just feels too true in not only people, but also just life. My brother-in-law surprised our family a few years back by taking us out to dinner, and at that dinner he announced that he was taking an internship in Peru. Turns out he was on a major US reality show and had signed an NDA and couldn't tell us where he was really going. He ended up being a semi-finalist, going all the way to the finale. He said the parts that they make especially dramatic, the parts where contestants stand in front of the judges and explain themselves and then ultimately one is sent off of the show, could take hours to film, and that each of them would have their reaction filmed a handful of times with the producers standing right there on set acting as directors and coaches. He also said that the contestants were constantly supplied with booze of their choice and were encouraged to drink. He said people were under the influence of alcohol very frequently, but that it would never be evident as the cameraman would keep the drinks out of the shots. As far as the rigging of the results went, he said he was fairly certain that the producers were having the final say, but that the judges were included in the decision-making process. A friend of mine was on Cupcake Wars. His team actually came first. He said that the ingredients were partially random. The studio sent his team a list of 5 or so different ingredients that were potentials, and then 3 different themes. He had a plan for every single ingredient and theme if needed. Britain's Got Talent. There are several hidden rounds with producers before you get to the main stage with the judges. My cousin is a very talented musician and got to the last round before the auditions, but they said he didn't have the right image. They select the most watchable acts and usually try and avoid any act that's too professional in case they bow out and get a recording contract outside of the show's format. This is just concerning musicians at least, so not fake as such, but slanted. I know someone who went on Britain's Got Talent once, and I will simply say that they made a bit of a butt of themselves, but it was also kind of a mixture of their own decision making and the way that the scene was shot and edited. Undercover Boss is a joke. Everyone knows the show, everyone knows what's going on, everyone knows who the owner of the store is, and for those who don't, are a simple Google search away from knowing. I briefly appeared in an episode of Airport 24/7 Miami. My appearance was basically me doing my job the same way I would do without cameras rolling. The same was true of the stars of the show, since it wasn't like a traditional reality show where they needed to create a conflict. The airport does that organically. They got really lucky that some particularly noticeable events happened while they were filming, like when the fuel farm caught fire and exploded, or when 2 aircrafts collided on the taxiway. Everything they showed on the show actually happened, but editing did make some events seem more dramatic. Oh, is it bad that this subject is actually making me want to work on reality TV shows behind the scenes so I can laugh at the fact that a show is trying to manufacture conflict and whatnot? It just sounds so silly. Like something from a holy book where God, played by MTV, bursts into your life. And this Miami one was interesting because there's a day-to-day conflict going on there, but the MTV people just go, okay, you hate this guy, that guy hates that guy, you love this guy, and you hate that guy because she loves this guy. That kind of thing. And the thing is, I scarcely ever watch shows like this, but being on the inside, being behind the scenes and creating this stuff can be a harrowing but entertaining process. Throwaway for obvious reasons. I was on Love Island last year. It's a popular TV reality show in the UK. This year's is actually on at the moment. I guess people assume some is staged and rigged, but you have no idea how much. We were literally given scripts of arguments to have, things to say. You know when you see them having sex under the covers? Not happening. We would have to imitate this 5 to 10 times each, and the producers would choose the most realistic one. There is whole parts of the villa that you don't even see. Multiple camera rooms. Ever wondered how the islanders never clean, but it always gets cleaned? There is literally cleaners, waiters, etc. in the whole time. Only about 6 hours a day and night are filmed. There is a director there saying cut and everything. You know the £50,000 grand prize for the winner? Doesn't compare to the $75,000 we got for being in the villa. Regardless if we were there for 6 days or 6 weeks, when we got out, we had meetings and I had over 600 brands queuing up to work with me. Now I'm a nobody, and you wouldn't even recognize my name. Relationships aren't real. There is an agreement that is 100% for the show. Things are never how they seem. Also, we are shown the episodes every day. There is no will be cool to see what I look like on TV when I get out. There is also outside contact. That is just bullcrap. My jaw literally dropped on my 4th day when they showed us the show live on TV because of how different it was to reality. What was something you saw you were definitely not supposed to see? My severance check. Apparently someone at the payroll company addressed it to me instead of HR, opened it at my desk, and laughed. Packed up my crap, and left. I found a letter between my parents back when my dad was in the army 10 years before I was born, when cleaning out the house. He was saying how they should get a divorce because it just wasn't seeming to work out. When I was 16, they did end up getting a divorce. And I have never spoken to them about it. Leaving work late one evening, I saw the HR director and CFO in a dark office shredding papers. No, that's not a euphemism. I didn't say anything, but quietly walked on down the hall. 2 weeks later, we were raided by the SEC and several people were charged with cooking the books. Sounds like some Wolf of Wall Street stuff going on there. Back in 1997, I started work at a new job and took over the office of a salesman who had recently been fired. I was in IT using the same computer that had been set up for sales. My first task was to install all the software I'd need. The computer hard drive was almost full, so I poked around and found a ton of folders filled with smut. Went to my supervisor and he said to delete it, warning me that the salesman had been fired for downloading smut. Over the next few weeks, I kept finding secret smut folders on the company's network. Not only had he downloaded enough smut to max out his computer's HD, he had the network at about 90% capacity. When I was done deleting all of the folders I could find, the server capacity was less than 50%. Dude was seriously addicted to his smut. I wouldn't have just fired him. I would have booked therapy appointments on his behalf. Worked for a downtown metropolitan hotel for a long time, and I've seen a lot of stuff I wasn't supposed to see. Probably the worst was a kid with an old man. Checked this guy in at 1 a.m, not uncommon because people travel at different times, but he was alone. Like an hour later, he asked for something like a towel or blanket. Anyways, we dispatched our runner to deliver it. After the runner comes to me and says he thinks something is wrong because he caught a glimpse of someone and the old guy was trying hard to block the entrance. Being that we were supposed to take stuff like human trafficking seriously, I asked our maintenance guy to cut his power so we could get a call to come up and try to fix the problem. He does, and I go up with him to apologize for the inconvenience because the guy was a member. Sure enough, we hear a kid in the bathroom hiding. Try to ask who the kid was, and the old guy tried everything to shut us down, from throwing his status around to bribing. We called the cops and we let them deal with it. Just 2 days ago at a community pool, a teenage couple who entered into the pool area went into the hot tub, stood up to stretch my legs and looked over to, well, SX in the hot tub. It was midday. I cringed pretty hard, but I laughed even harder when the neighborhood cop showed up. I once arrived early to pick up a girl for a first date. She was renting a small garden apartment behind a bigger house. It was just after dusk and I walked around the corner. The sliding door was standing open, and she was inside walking around, brushing her hair, wearing only her underwear. She did not see me, so I just walked back around that corner and waited another 10 minutes. When I walked around again, she had a dress on. I never told her. The date went well, and I only got to see her underwear again several weeks later. When I was about 16, snooping in my parents' wardrobe, I found a diary written by my mother when she was 14 from the year 1970. Read some beautiful and brilliantly written entries about meeting and dating my dad, who was 16 at the time. Had to read a little between the lines in some slightly later entries as they were written with such flowery language. In one such entry, all of a sudden, she discloses that she's had an abortion, performed by one of my relatives, an anesthesiologist, and she has never told anyone. This is the reason that you don't poke around in people's diaries, because you might find something that you never wanted to know. I was in elementary school playing basketball. I shot the ball, but it ended up going over the fence onto the other side of what was someone's backyard. My teacher requested that after school I knock on the door of the house where the ball had landed to get it back, and so I did. I did not expect a woman wrapped in a towel with one of her nipples revealed to answer the door. I was shocked, but carried on with my mission. For those wondering, she stated she did not have the ball. Back when I was a teenager, we hosted a New Zealander at our house for a couple weeks. Guy gets to our place after the flight, and about 10 minutes later, I'm walking around my house to see where he's at. The door to his room is partially open, and the dude is laying face down on the bed and humping the ever-loving hell out of a pillow. I backed away slowly, like Homer when he saw a poo cheating on his wife. I felt bad for the pillow. My mom gave me an old laptop of hers when I was about 13, and I was scrolling through random pics she had left on it of my little brother's football game, and then boom, nudes. Years ago, a colleague had an old smartphone that he brought in to give to another coworker as theirs broke. The phone was sitting on the new owner's desk, but she hadn't yet tried it out. As it was still charging after months of not being used, we were talking about how cool it was of the coworker. Smartphones were not widespread yet, and I picked it up to see how it felt in my hand. I pressed a button, and the first thing that I saw was a Google search for lump on anus. I quickly put the phone back down. This must have been the last thing he searched for when he last used it a long time ago, and forgot about it. When I was 11, I walked into my mom's bedroom and saw my mom and her husband doing everyone's favorite number, and we never spoke about it. Years later, when I was 24, she walked into my bedroom and saw my boyfriend naked. We never spoke about that either. All probably for the best. My dad's Alcoholics Anonymous chips. Learned it's why my parents got divorced. Proud of him for being in recovery, though. When I was a young teen, I was once leaving my house to go do something in the neighborhood. As soon as I go out of the door, I heard my parents at the garage. My mother seemed to be in her car, and my father was sitting down behind her car and pleading with her not to leave. My parents were divorcing, and I saw a few scenes that I wish I never had. Not really horrific, but seeing your parents in emotional pain can be rough. No doubt, no doubt. The code to open all the doors in my primary school at the time. A lot of power to open any locked door for an 8-year-old. I don't know about anyone else, but I remember being a kid and being like, looking at the chain link fence in my primary school and going, I could climb that, I could escape, wanting to escape, thinking about escaping, but then I'd always chicken out and be like, oh God, but what would the consequences be? Am I going to get in trouble with the teachers? What would my mom do to me if I ran away from school for a day? Like, 8 to 10-year-old me, what are they going to do? I'd go straight home. And what would happen then? My mom would probably walk me all the way back to school, and it would just be a massive waste of time. I do conventions and corporate events for a living. Was once called into a room to fix a power cable. It was a meeting of a worldwide, well-known house paint manufacturer. It was a closed-door meeting, and I had to be let in to do my job quickly. They didn't stop talking as I did my work. We've pulled all the units from production and recalled all units on the shelves, but the ones still in transit cannot be recalled. They might be caught when they reach the sales floor if the retailers are still watching the recall, but it will have been weeks since we issued it. The guy who then responds to that states that they can prove they did their diligence in court with the recall, and any units sold to consumers will be the retailer's fault. I never did get to hear what the recall was for, but they seemed pretty tense about it, legally speaking. So I doubt it was quality control. I felt like I had witnessed the mafia talking about a murder. The owner of the club where my sister worked took an armload of shotguns out of his truck. It was about 3 a.m. and I was parked behind the bar waiting for her. The reason I know he didn't mean anyone to see is because he covered them with a tarp and he gave a good long stare around when he got out. Shady dude. He was up to every kind of no good. I literally scrunched down in my seat. I accidentally found someone's notice of performance improvement plan on our company open access SharePoint site. Went straight to my manager so they could quietly inform the manager of the person and have it removed. The person on the performance plan quickly became a top performer and closed the second biggest deal in the region. Not long after, their manager was replaced. Maybe they were always good. Maybe they saw the improvement report and thought, damn, I need to get my affairs in order. And they did it in spades. I used to work in the basement of a pretty large hospital doing engineering work. They'll often cart dead bodies out of the hospital through the basement, so it's usually not a big deal. You tend to try and ignore it. One time, as I was finishing up a test in a pretty remote room, I walked out to an entire security detail escorting a body. I just got immediately shoved back into the room, so nothing really exciting happened, but I always wondered who that could have been. My third job I had at 17 was at a pizza place. I had 2 managers, one male, one female, and they were both married to other people. Well, I went to hand in my drawer at the end of the one shift and walked into the office, and there they were just making out with some heavy petting. Their spouses found out. They left their families, and then those 2 managers got married to each other. As far as I know, they're still together. Also, no, I didn't tell their families. I was 17. I didn't even know these people's spouses. Their families found out because they told them themselves, because they both wanted divorces from their respective spouses. I tend to have a way of finding things out that I'm not supposed to due to my inquisitive nature, but one that comes to mind was when I left my last job. My general manager wasn't exactly a warm, woolly person and was not pleased that I was leaving. I had to get something out of the manager's office and saw my name in an email on the desk. She had told the other 2 managers to wish me the best of luck in my future career and that I would be missed. I was shocked because she actually took the time to send that out to them. Never heard that from any of them, but seeing it showed that she actually cared. Whenever I meet or hear someone say, I am an inquisitive person, I have an inquisitive nature, I just think, you're bloody nosy, which is hypocritical because I'm nosy too. On my way to work in the morning one day, and I'm on a train leaning up against a glass partition between 2 seats. The lady on the other side was doing the same thing, and as her mobile kept pinging with incoming messages, my attention was drawn to it, and because of the angle, I could see the text exchange. To summarize, she offered services of the scatological nature, and the person on the other end was complimenting her on how her mess didn't stink, and I'm going to leave it at that. Definitely not something I should have seen. What everyone made in my company salary-wise, CEO and all high ranks included. It was a very detailed Excel file meant for the owners of the company. For every tier you went up, that salary pretty much doubled. I was 12. I was trying to make my BMX bike into a long-forked chopper-style bike. There was an old man down the road that welded as a business. I had dropped my bike off for some welding on my forks. Went back several days later to pick up my bike. Walked into his shop just as another man pulled an enormous bag of the devil's lettuce out of a duffel bag. They both stopped and just stood there, staring at me for a moment. I turned around and noped the hell out of there. The men then proceeded to look at each other, say, well, that was kind of awkward. See you in a month or something? I suppose depending on the year and place that this occurred, it would be more or less worrisome if someone saw you do a handoff with a big bag of the devil's lettuce. Back in high school, my friends and I used to skateboard in a church parking lot. One day we're hanging out and this car comes tearing into the parking lot and drives over to a secluded corner. A lady gets out and goes to her trunk and pulls out a gun. We think she's about to delete herself, but then she notices us standing there. She paces back and forth a few times before getting back in the car and leaving. As soon as she left, we went across the street to a convenience store and called the police. I think this might be the first story where someone was like, I witnessed a crime, and then actually went on to call the police instead of burying it in the back of their mind and, posting it on the internet. It might not be the kind of answer you're looking for. A teenage boy's hands, skin, and muscle essentially degloved. I was visiting my folks when the kids came up to the front door, knocked several times, and then promptly collapsed. He'd been riding a go-kart at full speed when the chain broke, wrapping itself around his wrist. The kid survived, but totally lost his hand, amputated. I was a little kid and I went looking for something in the house. Opened a closet in the basement that I usually never looked into and found a huge stack of Christmas presents. Walked over to them and saw they were all from Santa. What the actual heck? Why would Santa deliver presents 2 weeks early, and why would he leave them in the basement closet? I used to work on oil rigs, and one stormy night I had to go to the cellar deck, the lowest level of the rig, to do a repair, and I caught the safety officer and the production supervisor opening a separator valve and emptying the contents, oily water, straight into the sea. They obviously chose a wintry, stormy night to do this so that by morning the oil would be elsewhere. My wife and I vacationed to London a couple of years ago. After dinner, we decided to go out to try some of the local pubs because, London. We didn't want to go to the tourist tourist-trap places, so we followed around some locals. It was about 11 p.m. when we got to the last pub. It was a nice-looking place with a younger crowd. I really had to pee, but I couldn't find a restroom anywhere. I walked up to the guy working the front door and asked him where the restroom was. He looked at me kind of funny and said, "Upstairs, first door on your left." I thanked him and scurried back into the bar. The staircase was in the back left corner, blocked by a table. I found it odd. I had to ask the group sitting at the table to move to let me slide by. They thought it was strange too by the looks on their faces. You could tell that these stairs weren't meant to be used, but I had been drinking and my bladder was about to bust. As I reached the next floor, there's a long hallway with about 5 doors. The bouncer had told me it was the first door on the left, so I tried it. Nope, it was a dark room with empty kegs. Pretty normal, maybe he meant the right door. Nope, dark room with extra supplies. I started to wonder if I was too drunk to follow directions, but then I noticed I could see a light under the door at the end of the hallway. That must be the bathroom. Or so I thought. I opened the door to find a group of people in very sharp business attire seated around an oval table. They were clearly having a meeting of some sort with their laptops out. They were incredibly surprised to see me. They all froze in place and we all looked at each other for a good 15 to 30 seconds. Finally, one of the guys says, "What the hell are you doing here, mate?" I replied, "I'm just looking for the bathroom. The door guy told me it was up here." They all looked a little confused, but the guy responded, "We don't have a restroom in this building now, please leave." I apologized and closed the door, then headed back down the staircase, confused as hell. The good news was that my urge to pee went away. I slid past the group at the table and returned to my wife, who had ordered some fish and chips, and told her all about what happened. We both agreed it was strange, but ordered another round and thought nothing of it. About 5 minutes later, I noticed the guy in the very nice looking suit come down the stairway. He saw me, then went to the security guy at the front and said something to him, then pointed at me. I almost pooped myself. The bouncer walks up to me and says, "You guys have to leave." I told him that I had not yet paid my tab, and he said not to worry about it, just go ahead and leave. I obliged. My wife and I stand outside the bar while we wait for our Uber to take us back to our hotel. The bouncer is sitting there just staring at us. It was a very awkward 5-minute wait. When our Uber gets there, the bouncer says in a very Jamaican accent, "You'll have a very good night," followed by a very loud laugh. To this day, one of the weirdest events of my life. Why were they having a business meeting at 11 p.m. in a pub on a Saturday night? Why did the bouncer tell me to go upstairs when he knew there was no bathroom? Why did they kick us out afterwards? Why did the bouncer creepily laugh at us? We have no idea what happened, but we love to tell this story and see what everyone else's theories are. I can only assume English gangsters, or maybe, I don't know, shareholders in the property meeting for whatever reason. Like, that's a thing, I think. And I mean, Soto, why not? You own a pub. Why not just meet at 11 o'clock at night, drink to your heart's content while getting some goddamn work done? I was living in San Marcos, Texas in early 2003. My boyfriend at the time and I were heading home from a party around 2 or 3 a.m. when we get stopped at a train crossing and a super long train is going by. I mean, we sat there for a solid 15 minutes watching this train go by. Some of the cars had slats or cage walls, so you could see what was in the cars when they were backlit by the streetlights. We could clearly make out a large amount of military equipment was being moved down to the coast, or maybe an airfield. Within a month or so, it was publicly announced that the US was invading Iraq. Shared the house with my parents. Got a letter from ISP for illegal downloading. It was smut that involved multiple people. Had to tell my 70-year-old father that I knew and where he could find the free stuff online. A conversation I'm sure many of us never wish to have. Back in 2012-ish, I ran a food truck in Chicago. Chicago apparently let the Restaurant Association practically write the food truck ordinance. The ordinance stated that trucks could only be parked for a total of 2 hours at a time. We needed more time than that to make the sales we needed to be profitable. My boss had a few restaurants and the Restaurant Association wanted him as a member, so we got to sit in on a meeting and make our case about the parking time. During this meeting, they were having a discussion about how to kill the new minimum wage laws that were being discussed. It was like I was seeing the elite discuss how to keep the common people down, and it made me so incredibly angry. Doing retail PC repair, I found a massive folder of CP on a customer's laptop. Called the cops, state police, and FBI were there within 30 minutes. He ended up getting like 20 years. I was in a church in France once and it was pretty empty, very run down and had bullet holes in the walls, presumably from World War II. Anyways, on the right-hand side of the church, there was a wooden floorboard covered up by carpets. Curiosity got the better of my brother and he lifted lifted it to find a passageway down to a tomb with skeletons and coffins without lids on them. I recently looked at the photos we took, and it was truly creepy. My 65-year-old mother getting out of her wheelchair and walking around like it was nothing. She'd been wheelchair-bound for 5 years at this point. I'd had my suspicions, but had talked myself out of them because that was ridiculous. Who would pretend to be wheelchair-bound just for the attention? Sadly, when you are around long enough, you find that people are willing to do lots of things simply for attention. While looking for my birth certificate, I found a death certificate for a brother I never knew I had. This made me curious. I looked a little further and found family photos from my mom's previous marriage I was never told about, as well as her divorce records. She had a whole other family before ours and never told us, but I'll never bring it up to her because it's really none of my business. I opened the deep freezer and saw a severed German shepherd's head. I worked at a university animal research hospital. I knew better than to look in there. Worst fear confirmed. Also saw a window into the digestive system of a cow, and a dead horse lifted by forklift into a truck for disposal. I do kind of wish I could unsee all of that. It sounds like an unpleasant and kind of gruesome job, but it also sounds like an interesting one. Grew up with separated parents, and my mother worked her butt off to provide us with a lifestyle we definitely didn't deserve. 60+ hours every week, while my siblings and I fought constantly, verbally and physically. One Christmas, we wanted a really expensive toy. Well, we went on a scavenger hunt to find it, and we did. As soon as we told her, she broke down in tears. I'll never forget the pure regret I felt in that moment. I felt like an absolute douchebag, and still do. One day, I'm going to provide for my mother with everything she deserves and more, and make sure she never has to lift a finger once she retires. Amen to that, brother. I also lived in a single household my whole life, and my mother is an absolute angel who has provided me with the best care that she can, and she deserves the world. The cream will rise to the top. Hope you enjoyed that bootleg Randy Savage. Rest in peace, Macho Man. What happened at the worst party you've ever been to? I went to a friend's graduation party after high school. I wasn't great friends with him, but I figured I would stop by with my girlfriend because he was nice enough to invite me. The party was so done up, tables full of food, streamers, confetti, all that junk, and my girlfriend and I were the only ones there. I felt awful. His parents clearly went all out to celebrate it, and it was so uncomfortable being one of 5 people there, including him and his parents. I felt awful for him. We stayed for hours out of pity and just kind of made small talk. Super depressing. We went to a friend's 40th birthday last year. She's burned some bridges lately and had an ugly divorce. My husband and I didn't want to go, but we felt like it would be good to show up. Same thing, lavishly decorated, amazing food, lots of drink. We were tastefully late and arrived to find her alone, weeping in the kitchen. There was no escape, even after she chastised us for being so late. So frickin' sad. And all she wanted to talk about was that she was sure other folks would show up soon. Leaving was way more uncomfortable than staying, but by 1 a.m. it was clear no one else was coming. We were full and tipsy and walked home in a depressed silence. High school, late 80s, at an outside party with a bonfire to celebrate the end of the school year. Some numbnuts throws a glass bottle of beer into the fire, and about 20 minutes later that bottle explodes and shoots a stream of boiling beer all over a girl's crotch and legs. Ambulance was called. I believe she required several skin grafts over several months. I can still remember her shrill screaming and then her passing out. I had kind of a similar thing happen, but with far less of a horrible climax to it, where some guy who crashed a camping party that we were doing, lots of beer and all that stuff, threw a beer can on the fire. That beer can popped due to the heat and the gas releasing all of a sudden, and it landed on a friend's tent, burning their tent down, and they had to sleep with me the night. My brother was at a party once where there were more than a couple underage drinkers present. The house they were at had a thin driveway, so all the cars were packed into a bottleneck. The night wore on, and around 1 a.m, someone decided they wanted to go home. They found the girl who owned the car at the front of the bottleneck and asked her to move her car so she could get out. She said she couldn't because she had a breathalyzer installed in her car and it wouldn't start until someone sober blew into it. They went around the party and tried to find anyone who hasn't been drinking and couldn't find one. Another guy had the brilliant idea of asking the cool 20-something dude next door to do it. So an envoy of teens heads over to the house next door and asks the dude living there if he would please blow into a breathalyzer so they could leave. The dude takes a minute to look the group over, takes a drag of his cigarette and says, "You're gonna give me $25 for every person at the party or I'm calling the cops." He certainly has the makings of a savvy businessman. My sister's birthday was in the middle of the school holidays, and for her 7th birthday, she had a party that no one turned up to. Turns out our mother put the wrong date on the invite, so a lot of people had tried to come over the day before whilst we were out. This makes me feel very grateful that a large breadth of the guests, I suppose, I invite to parties usually show up. Some girl apparently had made out with a guy who wasn't her boyfriend before leaving. Someone at the party tells him via text, and a little while later someone is kicking down the door. He barges in, waving a gun around, screaming, "Which one of you douchebags made out with my girl?" People are ducking, scurrying away, and I'm just standing there thinking, if this is how I die, I'm going to be so mad. Host, who knew him, quickly pushed him out the door. Host just walks in and says, "Jerry, you're ruining another party? That's it. I don't care if you're armed and dangerous. Get the hell out of my house." My pal had a birthday sleepover. We were in 8th or 9th grade, I think. Street Fighter 2 had just came out for the SNES, so that was basically all we did. His parents had laid out some snacks and drinks on a party table, and there was one of these huge bags of party-sized Doritos there. We were playing Street Fighter when one of the guys grabbed a chip, bit into it, and yelled, "Oh, this chip is wet." He began investigating the bag, and we quickly discovered all the chips were wet. The birthday boy's 5-year-old brother had taken advantage of our Street Fighter distraction and licked all of the Dorito dust from every chip and placed them back in the bag. We found him playing in his room, his face covered in the implicating dust. This reminds me of a significantly less disgusting prank I wanted to pull on my brother, where I took all these soft chocolate-filled bits from a box of Cocoa Pops Rocks, if anyone remembers that cereal. Months go by. Turned out he didn't really eat cereal anymore, so I had to eat this whole bowl of, the hard bits in Cocoa Pops Rocks. And I was like, well, damn, that was a waste of time. And I also remember one time my brother tried to give me a sandwich, a jam sandwich, which as a little boy was my favorite, but I had so little trust in him, I was like, "What did you do to it?" "Nothing." And I looked in it. I just immediately examined the sandwich, opened it up, and there was just a pair of sardines in it. Went to a bachelor party at a house someone rented with a buddy. We got there late, so everyone was pretty lit by the time we got there, especially the bachelor. Now, he had hired like 4 entertainers of a certain variety for the party to walk around and dance for everybody, but at one point the entertainers took the bachelor to the middle of the room and they were going to do a dance just for him. Again, by this time, the dude is gone, but he managed to stumble into a chair in the middle of the room. The entertainers set up this kiddie pool in front of him, and a couple of them were going to wrestle each other, covered in baby oil. While they were oiling each other up in the middle of the room, one of the other entertainers starts to dance for the guy, and, well, she made it past like one verse of "Pour Some Sugar on Me" when homie just threw up everywhere. I mean, this was like someone turned on a fire hose of vomit. Of course, he just drenched the poor girl that was dancing for him, which made her freak out and run away towards the kiddie pool, which, may I remind you, now has 2 oiled up entertainers. And this lady, covered in vomit, slips, takes the other girls down with her, and she throws up all over them. At this point, there's 3 entertainers flailing around like fish out of water, trying desperately to get out of a kiddie pool covered in baby oil and vomit, slipping and falling over each other while the bachelor is just passed the hell out, covered in vomit, drooling on himself in a chair in the middle of the room. And just to add to this, I guess the entertainers bring a guy with them for protection or whatever, and he is losing his crap. He's trying to get the girls out of the pool, getting all sorts of nasty stuff on himself, slipping around while just repeating, "What the hell?" over and over. Good times. For some more than others, surely. White racist redneck guy took off his shirt to reveal prison swastika tattoos, also pulled out a gun, saying he would go commit hate crimes. He began waving the gun around, getting upset. He was already super wasted. I left the room and just about left the party, but the guy who owned the house made him put his gun out in his car. Fast forward a couple hours, we were playing beer pong. Drunk racist swastika dude was playing on a team with his wife. Me and my best friend were his opponents. He was too drunk to hit anything, and his sober wife sucked. So he used distraction tactics. He took out his pecker and flopped it into the cups. His pecker was freaking huge. After a while, that stopped fazing us, so he decided to take his 20-year-old wife's clothes off. He stripped her naked while she was sober, the only girl at the party, in front of like 20 other drunk dudes. She did not look comfortable, but also, for whatever reason, didn't stop him. After a while, once that wore off, he ordered her to go to our side of the table and flirt with us while she was naked. That's when I left. Next time I saw him was after my friend's death. Drunk racist dude had given my buddy a bunch of pills, and my buddy, like an idiot, took them. Started feeling weird, drove home, and died when his heart blew up. Nobody found him for 3 days. Drunk racist dude showed up at my work, crying because he hadn't been invited to the funeral, because he had essentially killed him. He was upset that nobody seemed to care about him and that even his wife had left him. Thank Christ. I don't know why he thought I would care, but he said I was the only one he could talk to. I had only met him twice before this. It was awkward, and I told him he'd be okay. He just needed to figure some stuff out. I was pretty honest with him about all the crap that he had done, which was stupid. He agreed. I bought him a pack of cigarettes. I worked at a gas station at the time, and he rode off on his motorcycle. Never heard from him again after that. No idea what happened. I'm curious about what other company this person keeps to even be in the vicinity of this individual. Like, I'm all for having a diverse, rich group of friends from all walks of life, whether they be liberal, conservative, religious, non-religious, but at a certain point, you gotta look at someone and go like, I don't even want to be in the same vicinity as you. Somebody brought their baby. Keep in mind, we were all 17, so it was like, what the hell? My 9th birthday party, I invited the entire class as well as my only friends. They went to another school. The only person that showed up was my grandpa. Over 10 years ago, my employees got together to throw me a going-away party. It was held at a local bar that had closed to the public, just for the party, so of course I'm feeling really special. There was a kid there, around 19 years old, who was a really good guy but generally attracted trouble. I used to talk to him all the time, and any time I sensed that he was about to step and do something stupid, I used to always say, you know, the worst gift a kid can give his mother, a dead son. There's a long story behind that, but it just somehow became a thing I always said to him. Anyway, I gave a quick speech and started to duck out just as things were livening up so everybody could have their fun while I returned to my wife and our newborn. I bumped into that kid on the way out, talked to him a bit, and of course the dead son line was the last thing I said before I left. Actually, I said, you know, the worst gift, and he answered, a dead son, gave me a hug, and that was it. Pretty obvious how this story ends. Got the call a few hours later telling me he'd been killed in a car wreck. Turns out that he was trying to do good. Hadn't drank a drop, no drugs or anything. He just got into the wrong car and let a drunk idiot drive him home. There were about 4 kids in the car, and he was the only one that didn't walk away. Sad. A friend told me about this corporate party held for the clients he was at. Open bar, but pretty dull, with people being on their best behavior to schmooze and make the clients feel important. It was open bar in the sense that employees were understood to hold it together. One very, very low on the totem pole employee got hammered drunk with one of their biggest clients and proceeded to get to 3rd or 4th base in the pool for like half an hour. He was fired the following Monday. Probably worth it to him as he was making minimum wage. My wife was on her way up to the north of England to be a bridesmaid for her friend who she has known since they were young. Her friend has learning disabilities, but seems happy with her husband-to-be. On the morning of the wedding, the groom was arrested for bad-touching young children. He was apparently a known pedophile. The bride's family went ahead with the wedding reception anyway. If they actually knew, that is utterly insane to me. An old friend of mine who unfortunately is no longer with us used to throw house parties all the time in high school. It would usually be 15 to 30 people getting wasted and doing illegal substances. This one particular time he hosted a massive high school party because his parents weren't home. So he had probably between 80 to 90 of us teenagers at his house partying like crazy and using every illegal substance that we could get our hands on. About an hour and a half goes by, and people are messed up and having a blast. I was toasty. My buddy who hosted the party filled up capsules with illegal high, and he was swallowing those all night. So, like I said, an hour and a half goes by, and someone asks him where his parents went on vacation. His response? They're not on vacation. They went out to watch a movie. Just then is when the car rolls up, and suddenly a bunch of drunk and stoned punks pour out of every orifice of the house to the closest park. Every single person in that house took off. Everyone, even the guy who hosted the party. I don't know if he was worried his parents would kill him, or maybe he was so messed up he just forgot that he was at his own house. Man, I missed that guy. I was in high school and a classmate was moving, and his family had already gone to the new house. The old house was going to be torn down and was vacant, so he threw a break my stuff party. People showed up with baseball bats, all kinds of stuff, and I felt underdressed with an axe handle. Alcohol was involved. I was greeted at the door by a guy with a 6-shooter in his waistband holding a chainsaw. The event only went downhill from there. I was 16 and now, many years later, I'm a dad. It makes me cringe very hard that my offspring would never attend an event like that. Not gonna lie, that sounds pretty fun. But I'd probably be like bringing stuff over and be like, is this okay to break? Is this okay to break? And it's like, everything's okay to break. I'd be self-conscious about it. I went to the beach for a friend's birthday party. After the sun went down, we drove back to her house, about 30 minutes away, to continue the party. When we got home, her dog was dead. Because she lived in a rural area, the other guys and I had to dig a hole and bury it so the coyotes wouldn't consume the carcass. Burying a dead dog is the weirdest thing I've ever done at a birthday party. Good Lord, I can only imagine just how devastated that girl would have been. I'd be heartbroken if I came home for a party and my dog was dead. That'd just be parties cancelled. Maybe sit around and feel bad and play Mario Kart for a bit, but I'd probably be losing with all the tears in my eyes. Halloween 2007. Random friend of devil's lettuce dealer having a party at the house across the street from the religious college APU. Those kids party hard. Best buddy and I made Roman armor with sheet metal by hand. We were definitely proud and looked kinda cool, I must say. Anyway, we show up to this party and there are maybe 20 people. The house is really small. Dude whose place it is like extremely stoked on our costumes. Makes us feel really welcome, which is nice at a stranger's party. He asks us if we can guard the keg and says we can drink all we want from it. We agree, of course. He has the keg in the laundry room, which is small. We chill and drink lots and meet lots of cool people getting beers. Hour rolls by and we realize that the party has gotten huge. 2 new kegs delivered, well over 150 people. The house is so full, it's scary. We are still at the keg and the bathroom is far away. My buddy is wasted and decides to pee into the washer. No regrets on his part. I try to make my way through the crowd, which is utterly impossible. My hand-cut sheet metal armor is poking and slicing people the more I push. Bad idea. People start screaming and laughing. Suddenly, some girl had to poop so bad that she just popped down in the crowd and let loose. The cops are also breaking up the party. House smells horrible. Friend and I are the last ones out. Poop smeared all over the floor, trampled and painted everywhere. Cops are dying laughing at the situation. I puke outside soon as we exit, like gallons of beer puke. Cops compliment my costume while crying, laughing. That was the highlight of the night, and that chick must not have pooped for days. This entire topic is reminding me of why I simultaneously miss and don't miss wild parties. I was at a trashy shotgun wedding reception and slipped off to take a whiz in the bushes. When I came back, there were 2 blonde strippers dressed as cops arresting the groom. I said, "Who the hell rents strippers for a wedding?" Really loud right as the music cut out. They were not strippers. Went to an isolated cottage in the woods up north that my friend's rich family owned. There was about 15 of us. Everyone except for me imbibed in some illegal substances. I don't do that stuff, really, but have no problem with them if they want to. I was getting drunk and had enough fun with that. Everything was going great until one guy started to have a really bad trip. Me and the guy who owned the cottage were the ones taking care of him because I was the most sober and he felt responsible for his parents' cabin. It turned really scary really fast. I pretty much carried him up the stairs into a room before someone else noticed and got a friend to come help me. We'd turn on the light and he'd start screaming that it was too bright. We'd turn off the light. He'd scream that it was too dark. He kept complaining that he had to use the bathroom, but wouldn't get up when we urged him to. My friend told me to fetch a different friend who said that he was not in the state of mind to deal with it and refused. Another friend told me that she knows him better than anyone else, so she should go talk to him. I tried to stop her, but she dashed past me and ran upstairs into the room and came out crying because he'd punched her in the face and then wet himself and peed all over her. We didn't know what to do. We just kind of left him in the room and went downstairs while all that was heard from upstairs was screaming and banging. We sat around in a circle and debated whether or not we should call an ambulance. Everyone ultimately decided against it because they didn't want to be fined for having illegal substances. The noises eventually stopped and we all went to bed. The next day, we found out that our friend had felt like he was trapped in his own skin and was trying to claw, bite, and rip it off. He was covered in bite marks and scratches. Everyone treated him like a monster and avoided him the next day, which made me really angry because it could have just as easily happened to any of them. That sounds like one major bummer of a night, and I sympathize in the disappointment with the other friends. Like, damn, to treat him so callously after, having a bad trip and whatnot. Hopefully that didn't just, put a wedge between that guy and the rest of the friendship group, because, God, that'd be sad. College party. Pre-drank with my buddies and their roommate Ryan. Ryan gets drunk, high, super confidence, and starts teaching us how to not take any guff from no one. We're walking to the party, and with zero context, he's preaching shoulders back, stand up straight, get right up in the guy's face. No idea why he feels the need to be such a tough guy. Within 5 minutes of being at the party, another guy puts Ryan in a headlock and blasts him in the face a quick 5 or so times. Blood everywhere, hosts freaking out. It turns out they were arguing about how good a mutual friend was at water skiing. Am I the only one confused about how that would lead to such violence? The only thing I can say that's resulted of this is that now I am more interested in how good this person is at water skiing and whose opinion was whose. Kid hosting the party didn't plan on dad coming home. Dad showed up, freaked out, cuts off his kid's finger with a decorative sword. Party ended. Kid went to the hospital to have his fingers reattached and showed back up at the house we moved the party to with a giant cast on. No, the dad didn't get in trouble. The kid was probably 19 or 20 and must have not told the hospital what had happened. Also, he cut them off closer to the tip, not the entire finger. I'm guessing they just sewed them back on. I don't think it required actual surgery. It happened relatively early in the evening and he didn't show back up at the next house until hours later. It was probably close to sunrise. It wasn't really a party at the next house. It was more like half the people from the sword house sitting around drinking and talking about how messed up the night was. That would certainly be a night to remember for just about everyone involved, I must say. That's hilarious, but also tragic. I'm mixed on this. It was the first party I ever went to. And the worst party I ever went to. It was all going great until this dude, drunk, caught his girlfriend making out with his friend and threw a freaking TV at him. Then he just went absolutely ape crazy and started screaming at him in the GF. I, like the others, stood in shock and slowly proceeded to finish my Pepsi and then get the hell out. After I left, my friend said, waste of a perfectly good TV. I was pledging to a fraternity and we had a crazy party. Towards the end, there were passed out people all over and a few brothers and myself who were still awake at 3 a.m. trying to kick strangers out. The last group was this passed out girl and her friend sitting on our couch on the first floor, and after much prodding and poking, the passed out chick begins to stir and moan, then proceeds to drunkenly sit up and mumble, I need to pee. She stands up all wobbly, then suddenly takes off her pants. Her friend has a shocked face, knowing what's about to happen. Brother Joe has a huge grin on his face, and I'm like, what the hell? The drunk chick squats and begins to pee all over our tiles. It was hilarious, and when she's done, her embarrassed friend grabs her and quickly leaves. We're all laughing our butts off when suddenly Joe abruptly stops laughing and yells to me, Pledge, grab 'em up and clean this up. What's something you found out about your significant other years into the relationship that made you reevaluate the whole thing? 9 months into the relationship, I found out he had a court date. He told me it was for assaulting a bouncer. Very soon after, his mother admitted that he had a court date for assaulting his underage relative. When I confronted him about this, he said that the underage girl raped him. When I told him he was full of crap, he went on to admit that she did something for him that I will not say. Soon after, I went into his lawyer's office with him and read the transcript. It turns out he had raped his underage niece twice and just tells a different lie to anyone who asks him why he's in jail. Total piece of crap. I ran very fast, haven't seen him since, and I hope I will never see him again. About 1 year in, he told me he was about to get full custody of his son. I didn't know he had a son. About a year in, I found out she lied to me about getting an STD test. Turned out she had more than one STD, which somehow I tested clean for. There is actually a reason for that. Some STDs have an easier time transmitting from men to women than from women to men. When I had my first child, the pregnancy wasn't a surprise or an accident. We talked and planned. He got a little overbearing during the pregnancy, like insisting on breastfeeding without even discussing it with me. I put it down to new dad nerves and not knowing any better. Turns out that was only the tip of the iceberg. He believed that children were completely and totally a wife's responsibility. He wouldn't change a diaper, he wouldn't pick up the baby when it cried. No way would he get up in the middle of the night. He expected me to work a full-time job plus do all of the childcare. At that point, I was confused and appalled, but I told myself he just needed time to adjust. I realized how delusional I was when the baby got sick while he was on a fishing trip. The doctors thought the baby had meningitis, so not just sick, but life-threatening sick. I called and asked him to come home. He refused. He'd paid for 2 more days of fishing, and he didn't want to lose the money. She would lie about tiny, inconsequential things, made me question my own perception of truth and self-instinct. Eventually caught her in a lie, and she denied even when presented with full proof. It wasn't something huge, but it was something that opened my eyes a little. My friend swears I was being gaslit. Out of nowhere, a year into being married, he said he wants to join the Marine Corps. He also wanted me to drop out of law school, birth babies, take care of his mother, and run a household, all while he's deployed. Hard pass. Found his hidden folder on his phone, blackmailed girls for nudes, stole nudes from girls, pretended to be someone else, and sexted his sister without her knowing it was him. Constantly made me feel like I was crazy or overreacting. Also realized what him calling me a manic pixie dream girl meant. I'm hardly a perfect specimen of a human being. I would like to believe that I have a respectable amount of moral fiber, but boy, do y'all know how to pick 'em. 7 years in, after having been married a year, my husband finally confessed to me that he was raped as a child for 6 years by his older brother. It really threw the struggles of our SX life into perspective. Now knowing this, I have done all kinds of research, found how to support rape victims, info, and I've changed how I behave when we're intimate. We're working on it. I tell him every time we're intimate that it's an act of love and he's safe with me, and we have our safe word for general use if he's feeling overwhelmed. We're really making progress. I think things are better now. He's starting to understand that it's love in our marriage, and I want him to want me, and I want him to be a little controlling when he feels up to it. He's grown a lot, he's a very strong person, and I'm immeasurably lucky to have him. That is a lot of trauma and baggage to take on, but with the right person and a whole lot of love, I think you'll get through it. I realized he would always blame me for his angry outbursts and mistakes. He punched a wall and screamed about a homework assignment he didn't understand because I was sitting on the couch quietly. Then after he was finished blaming me and realized I was upset, he became all sad and wanted me to comfort him. What a pathetic human being. I'm glad I've grown past accepting that sort of behavior. That my husband wanted to start fires and kill police officers and was planning on framing me for it so his girlfriend could move in while I did his time in prison for him. We were driving home from a dinner in which we drove separately to, and without knowing it, she cut me off by merging into my lane last minute without using a blinker. I was annoyed at first, but when I recognized it was her car, it made me feel very strange. I think that makes sense. Knowing that your significant other might be really reckless on the road is worrying, concerning, very concerning, especially if you plan to have kids. That she cheated on me and that she lied about being psychologically abused by her father. She lied about being financially responsible and was formulating a plan to murder me. Today, my girlfriend told me that every time we argue, she wants to stab me. Now, she might not mean it, but that is certainly a red flag. That she had been in contact with her exes, met them, and regularly cheated on me with just whomever. 8 years, she was really good at hiding her tracks. I only found out because I contracted an STD, curable fortunately, from her. I was really glad we didn't have kids and divorced her, moved away and drank too much. Then I met the most awesome person in the world, who I married, had kids, and didn't know relationships could be this good. Turned out my husband, who was sober from illegal substances and alcohol, had been using booger sugar monthly for the last 15 years, just enough to maintain apparently. We have worked it out, but I was almost gone at that point. He hid a few addictions and withdrawals from me. I forgave him. He stole $4,000 from our joint savings that only I contributed to. I forgave him. He sexted and was trying to meet up with randos, which made me realize I should probably leave. But the thing that made me certain was when I realized he didn't actually want an equal relationship. He expected me to shop, cook, clean, and be responsible for him for the rest of our lives. He pretended to want what I wanted for years, and I was dumb enough to believe his excuses on why he just couldn't do it yet. I demand and I deserve a reasonable equal relationship. Divorce was one of the best things I ever did. that she wants to have fights and be mad. For example, we currently haven't spoken for 3 days and she's sleeping in the other room because I accidentally texted "good night, sleep tight" instead of just "good night" because I was the one going to bed, not her. So in her mind, that text must have been meant for another woman. We live together, we work together, we share a car. How on God's green earth could I have a side chick? She told me when we first met that she was broken as she suffers from depression. I didn't brush it off, so to speak, but just kind of thought, yeah, whatever, it won't be that bad. It's not because I don't think depression isn't serious, but I just had never even really been in contact with someone with depression, so I kind of had no idea what it entails. Hopefully that makes sense. 5.5 years of being together later, and holy cow, damn, depression is just super serious. I've been in situations and scenarios I never imagined being in because of her and her depression. She's phoned me up twice while she was working in London. I live 60 miles away in Kent, saying she loves me and she's sorry and she's going to end it. What the hell do I do? I didn't know what to frickin' do. Thankfully, both of those times she never went ahead with it, but still ended up in hospital, and obviously I went up to her. Sometimes she's just crying and crying and crying and crying. Countless visits to the GP for talks and medication. Again, things I've never dealt with before, and at first I was extremely uncomfortable about it all. This isn't for me kind of stuff. But the good news is it and she are part of my life now. I don't mind all of the above anymore. She loves me and I love her. What's even more amazing is that I'm the one that keeps her going, she says. This is life, and I'm now fully aware of the seriousness of depression. She recently got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Made me look back and realize a lot of her actions and anger stemmed from that. She just started mood stabilizers and has found a great therapist to help her work through everything. But it would have almost been a deal breaker if she didn't try to actively manage it. She lied to me, or rather flat out denied telling me that she has herpes. Guess who has herpes now? Her reasoning? I thought you wouldn't talk to me if you found out I had it. I would have kept talking to her, but perhaps I would have wrapped it up first before, doing the deed so soon. Just frickin' disclose that information at the start. Don't be a butt who gives someone an STD knowingly. Yeah, that is definitely just completely and utterly unacceptable. 7 years in, I found out he was a high school dropout without even a GED. He had initially told me he was a game design major, turned down a job opportunity or internship, I can't recall which, with EA Toronto because he didn't want to leave me. I literally told him, go, we can figure other crap out later. This won't wait. I should have known then. Ugh, love is blind, but only for so long. Turns out when she said she wanted to get married, she actually meant that she just wanted to get married, by which I mean wanting to get married is not the same thing as wanting to marry me. I just happened to be the guy that she was with at the time when her friends were getting married, and it was making her jealous, and her mother was also putting pressure on her to get married. It happens to a lot more people than you think. After several years together, my ex told me nonchalantly one evening that he stole $500 from one of his best friends because he really needed it. This ex was a college-educated person trying to get into dental, medical, or pharmacy school. Not only was there no reason for this person to steal their friend's money, I didn't understand how someone could do that and feel no remorse whatsoever, especially to someone they considered a good friend. It was at that moment that I seriously began to believe I had given my trust and love to a total sociopath. It was the catalyst that pushed me out of the relationship. I found out later that while I was working on a degree in another city, he found dates on Tinder, spinning lies about being in med school and owning a luxury condo overlooking the Wisconsin state capitol. He'd take girls for rides on my motorcycle and bring them back to the condo I owned. I don't know who or how many, but a neighbor specifically went out of their way to tell me what was going on. One of his Tinder dates was with a good friend's best friend, and I heard through her the lies about being rich and working in medicine. A high school classmate of his texted me to warn me the same thing. He hit on a girl at a reunion by saying he was in med school at Wisconsin, but the girl was actually in med school at Wisconsin, and she promptly told everyone about the exchange. When I went to kick him out of the condo, he told me that his mother had turned into a raging alcoholic and that kicking him out would mean he couldn't take care of her anymore. He stole a whole bunch of stuff from me, some of which he still has, and after all of it, he had the gall to text and ask if he could manage my finances for me at his new job in, believe it or not, wealth management. I guarantee you he's stealing from every one of his clients. But when he said
said he stole from his friend, it really changed my opinion that he wasn't just an insecure millennial trying to find his way between college and the real world. He's a Class A raging narcissist, and holy crap, am I glad he's out of my life forever. A little over a year after being officially together, I finally put together that they had the cancer gene in their family. Despite being crazy in love with her, this made me want to back out because I totally saw a future with her. Her grandpa and dad both had head and neck cancers, 2 aunts and 1 uncle were survivors of ovarian and lung cancer. I knew I wanted kids, and she did too, so there was always this looming fear that our future kids might get it. Still went through because she mattered more to me than all my fears combined. Life plays a cruel joke, and despite having no vices and being an occasional drinker, she got the big C as well. Head and neck, just like Grandpa and her dad. Lost her a little over a year ago. Still no regrets. Still love her a lot. Damn. My wife and I married quickly without getting to know each other much. She was raised in a Mormon home, and I had converted to Mormonism at 18. We played the roles of provider and nurturer in our marriage according to the teachings of the faith. I left the faith about 6 years ago. She stopped attending about 2 to 3 years ago. The very difficult conversation when I left made us talk about things more than we ever had before. We dove deeply into so many aspects of our life, marriage, and desires for the future. I realized after years of marriage that she was actually an incredibly smart, dynamic woman. I loved her a lot before this. I always thought she was amazing, but because of the dynamics of each of our upbringings and the dynamic of the faith, I never realized how intelligent she was. I ask her opinions on things all the time now. We left our faith, ditched most of our baggage from our sexist upbringings, and I realized how great of a lifelong companion I have, and I am ecstatic about this. That he had been cheating on me and racking up debt. We had gotten married and made life plans that he had always known would never come to fruition because of what he was doing behind closed doors. Yet he allowed me to marry him anyway, knowing I was signing up for a life I did not want and that we did not agree on. I would have been the one to bear the brunt of the consequences for his actions. Well, I'm glad you got out of there. He told me from the very get-go that he was diagnosed with Asperger's in grade school, but I just brushed it off because I know many people who half-heartedly claim to be autistic. But a couple weeks ago, I was lying in bed while he was putting away one of his 50 pocket watches in his holding box that he keeps in pristine condition tucked away in his sock drawer. Then he proceeded to pick out a new axe to carry in his backpack full of supplies, and for some reason, it just hit me for the first true time that he is totally, 100% on the spectrum. And it made me think back to the times when he has done things that absolutely infuriate me, and he has no idea he had done something wrong, and suddenly I could see that he wasn't being manipulative or underhanded. His brain simply works in a different way than mine, and he even tried to warn me of this. I just for some reason chose to disregard the information. He is super willing to meet me halfway, even when he doesn't understand why something bothers me. He acknowledges how I feel, and he stops doing it. He is the goofiest, most eccentric ball of love I have ever met, and coming to terms with his autism has made me love him all that much more. Men! I don't know who needs to hear this, but there's still hope! He was always very secretive and a little paranoid. One example, I learned about 15 years into the relationship that his birthday is not in May like he said, but in November. When he moved to the US from England in the 1970s, they had written it down incorrectly in his passport, and he never changed it to his correct birth date. I still don't know why. Every flat and clean surface can and will become a closet space. It was my girlfriend of 2 years last night in town before leaving for college. She told me she was hanging out with her friends, which I was fine with, as we had planned to see each other every weekend. Turns out she didn't see her friends. She hung out with her ex-boyfriend and then left for school the next day and didn't answer her phone for a week. First time I talked to her after she left, she told me what she did and broke up with me. See, this kind of thing is why people have trust issues. That and much worse things. Things that have already been covered in this video even. There's a ton of things I discovered over the years we were together, but the biggest one was how he had lied about his exes. He talked terribly about them and would make them all sound like cheaters and liars or just plain psychopathic. It turns out that's not the truth at all. They were none of those things, and I found out the hard way that it was him that embodied those qualities all along. We have broken up and gotten back together many times over the past 6 years, but it ended for the last time this weekend. Good for you. She is perfectly okay flipping out on the kids. I mean, full-on cussing them out and yelling about stuff. I ultimately confronted her about it, and she said, "So everyone else is allowed to express themselves when they're upset, but not me. We had to have a long talk after that one, as would be expected. Her walls were just too high to ever get through. Intimacy, affection, emotion, romance, all gone, and she was unwilling to change. As can be the case with some to many people for a myriad of reasons, and it can be quite sad. I was just out of high school and was dating a girl. We were fairly serious but young. We went to Subway for lunch, and she was super rude to the poor girl working behind the counter, and after we left, she was saying how stupid she was. Couldn't even make the sandwich right. I started to notice she was rude to lots of service and retail workers. I saw her in a much different light after that. We didn't last very long. I think there's a saying where it goes something like, if someone's nice to you but not to the waiter, then they're probably not really a nice person. We are Texans. He likes beans in his chili, but I've decided I can make it work. 3 years into a 5-year relationship, my now ex-girlfriend finally told me she had a bad eating disorder after I overheard her throwing up after a meal. It was something I suspected in the past and questioned her on, but she was adamant with her denials. This was not the end. In fact, it was really just planting a seed of doubt. 2 years from this point, we were still together, and I was still trying to support her through treatment of her disorder. Eventually, more of her secrets started to come out, secretive alcoholism, childhood abuse, cheating. Even with all the secrets and lies, it was not easy to cut ties, but it was needed in order to keep my own sanity. My wife and I have very little boundaries. Oftentimes, while we're having a conversation in our room, one of us needs to use the bathroom. We'll just follow each other in the bathroom and continue talking. If the conversation is good enough, poop won't hinder our dialogue. However, there are times when my wife is in the bathroom and locks the door. I always thought it was weird, but it didn't bother me. We've been married for 9 years now. We met at 15 and are now 28. We've grown up together, graduated together, traveled together. We know each other so well and have nothing to hide from one another. Or so I thought. This all changed one day. I was feeding our kids lunch and she was in the bathroom. Unbeknownst to her, she did not lock the door. When I walked in on her, I witnessed something that I never thought I would see. Something that lived in the back of my head, but I didn't think it could be real. My wife of 13 years relationship, 9 years of marriage, 3 kids together, was shaving her upper lip. She is Puerto Rican and has a little peach fuzz that you can't even really notice, and she was shaving it like it was a full-on mustache. She looked at me with this embarrassed look, and I thought to myself, what else is she hiding? I don't know that I'll ever look at her the same again. That one was really cute. I like the tongue-in-cheek nature of it. She would ignore my opinion about anything. It started small, like forcing me to watch movies I didn't like with her. After that, she made dinner with food I disliked, then go to theme parks even though I told her I didn't want to go in a roller coaster. Over the years, it escalated to her saying we wanted at least 3 children. I've never wanted kids, and she knew that. I started to notice I didn't want to spend time with her anymore. It was exhausting. So, bye. We were together for 4 years before she told me she was obsessed with Star Wars. Like, what the hell? That's day one stuff. We could have been going to midnight shows and dressing up. Oh, the squandered time. One of you could have been Chewbacca and the other could be Han Solo. I didn't have much to do with my significant other, now ex's parents, for the first few years. This changed after we were married, and I discovered that she was basically a psychological carbon copy of her father, and I, her mother. Only problem with that was her father was a domineering man who wore his wife down over many years to the point that she was basically mute and offered no resistance to him. What he wanted, he got. My ex was already showing a tendency to bully me into supplication, and I realized I was heading down the same path as her mother. I had already started giving up trying to argue about anything with her. I saw my future quite clearly one day and left. To come to that realization, like, the back and forth and look in the mirror, that must be terrifying. Well, one day I was having a really crappy day at work. Headache, annoyed at my coworkers, etc., and was moaning about it to him. Then he shows up unannounced with Advil and my favorite coconut water, which was really frickin' sweet and made my day good again. But then, when I get home, this dude had a new PS4 controller waiting for me, with takeout from my favorite Mexican restaurant. So yeah, reevaluated a whole bunch, and now I'm saving up for a ring. What are some psychological experiments with interesting results? White rats and black rats were raised separately without seeing each other. When a black rat was placed in the white rat's cage, the other rats ostracized him. When white rats and black rats are raised together and a new black rat is placed in a cage, the white rats accept him. So basically, rats are racist unless raised to accept differences.
The self-fulfilling prophecy studies are very important to social psychology, and their findings have many real-world applications. Basically, they brought together a group of kids and formed a class with a real teacher. They gave the kids a test for overall academic skill at the start of the course, but didn't really use the scores. Instead, they told the teachers that a few students picked at random were very brilliant and scored very highly. They then observed the class for a long period of time and noticed that the teachers gave the kids they thought were brilliant much more attention. At the end of the study, the kids took the test again, and they found that the kids who were randomly named brilliant at the start actually scored higher than the rest of the class. The kids, again, at the start didn't score any different from the rest of the class, but through the self-fulfilling prophecy, they became the best in their class. This obviously has tons of applications in the real world and especially education. The monster experiment. Although it is horrible how they left the children with mental health issues at the end, the experiment gave very good insight to how to parent a child. In this experiment, they took groups of orphan children and separated them into 3 groups. One was the control, the second were told they had a lisp and were doing bad, and the third was told that their speech was perfect. As the experiment went on, Group 2 began developing lisps after being berated constantly. They became shy and reserved. They were scared to speak because they didn't want to get in trouble because of their poor speaking skills. Group 3, however, had the opposite happen. They spoke better, they were more willing to improve, they were encouraged to keep speaking and told that their speech was amazing and perfect. By the end of the experiment, they had one group with no change, one group with now mentally ill children with a speech impediment, and one group with great speaking skills. It truly shows that encouraging children is the way to go, and that verbal abuse can be just as, if not more, harmful as physical abuse. All things in moderation, as they say. I think any excessive amount of abuse or even nurturing and confirmation or whatever can be bad for anyone growing up. Because on one hand, you get people who grow up into quivering leaves of human beings, and that's unfortunate, but you can grow out of that. And then you have people who just become egotistical or maybe struggle to accept objective facts and maybe don't like it when people disagree with their more subjective opinions. The Monopoly Study by Paul Piff. He basically brought 2 strangers into the lab together and had them play a game of Monopoly together. He randomly assigned one participant to start the game with twice as much money than the other, and that participant also got to roll both dice to get around the board, i.e., the other participant started with half the money and could only roll 1 dice. At the end of the game, when he asked the participant who started with more money why he won the game, they would chalk it up to their excellent strategy and gamesmanship, rather than the fact that they had started the game with way more resources. It says a lot about how we deal with being born into a privileged state. I am skeptical as to whether or not you can actually equate real life in a game of Monopoly together and whether or not people would be that blind to their advantages. Not entirely sure if it fits into the category, but the Rosenhan experiment, 13 people feigned mental illness to get into mental hospitals, and all were admitted with different diagnoses. They then assumed their normal personalities, but to be released, they all had to admit that they were mentally ill. There was a second part where a hospital challenged Rosenhan to send multiple fake patients to the hospital, and they would rate their patients on a scale of whether they think they were faking. They identified many possible fakers, but Rosenhan, in fact, hadn't sent anyone. The 3 Christs of Ypsilanti. A psychologist forces 3 people who believe that they are Jesus Christ to live together. It does not go well. The psychologist in question, Milton Rokeach, had heard of a case where 2 men who believed that they were Mary, Mother of Christ, were forced to live together, and one of them broke free from their delusion. So he figured 3 Christs. What would happen? They were angry at each other, often had physical fights. They eventually started getting along by avoiding the topic. He would ask them about the others, and each would say that the others were crazy, that they, of course, were the real Jesus. No cures, some unethical stuff, but interesting. I'm a huge fan of Milgram's Small World experiment. It is more sociology than psychology, but I still think it's really cool. Milgram sends out 160 letters containing the name and address of a stockbroker in Boston to people in Omaha, Nebraska. They had to send it to someone they thought would get the letter closer, but they couldn't mail it directly to the stockbroker. Interestingly, most people that sent on the letter sent it onto the same group of people on the 5th degree. It only took 6 people, hence the 6 degrees of separation, to arrive on average. It shows how interconnected our world is, even before the internet, which is happy to think about.
That is kind of nice to think about. If you stare into a dimly lit mirror for 10 plus minutes, you start to see hallucinations. What individuals see tends to vary, but they've used this as a test to simulate schizophrenia before because some see monsters, deformities, or general weird stuff. I did a variation of it for a friend in uni and completely wimped out of it. After my face started not looking like my face anymore, I had a complete disassociation. I stopped looking and just waited out the time. I loved learning about infant development. My favorite was probably the development of depth perception, or perhaps the fear of heights. We're not born with it, but if I recall correctly, we develop it within the first year or so. Scientists created a raised square platform. Half of the floor was wood and the other half glass. The actual surface of the floor, 1 meter or so below, was white with red polka dots. At varying intervals of age, the babies would be brought in and placed on the wood and encouraged to crawl to their moms, who is standing at the glass end of the platform. In early infancy, babies crawl over there without giving a crap. At some point, though, they stop at the point where the wood meets the glass, or plexiglass, maybe, showing that they recognize the difference in height and the fear of falling. Babies' brains are pretty frickin' cool. It is definitely interesting to watch something that has low intelligence or self-awareness slowly gain more of it over time. You know, it's the process of how having a kid and everything is interesting. Reconsolidation. When you retrieve a memory from your long-term memory, it is susceptible to being manipulated. This can lead to memories being totally changed from the source. This is why eyewitness accounts cannot be fully seen as true. This knowledge is also being used to help people with PTSD by changing the negative memories they have of their particular trauma. The influence of the color red in sports. Judges were shown a video of a taekwondo match and awarded more points to the red competitor versus the blue competitor. When the colors were digitally reversed, judges awarded more points to the other, now red competitor. Red may be a signal of dominance, as reddened skin is associated with higher testosterone or possibly higher fertility in women. Wearing red may induce intrinsic psychological effects which increase dominance in addition to altering the perception of others. Researchers found that putting red leg bands on birds increased dominant behavior as they took the lion's share of the food. For my psychology degree dissertation, I presented photos of men to be rated on a scale of friendly 0 to threatening 10. Men received a higher threat score if I photoshopped their t-shirt to be red. Mice were put on two sides of a wall with a door in. Only the right mouse could open the door. Slowly, they filled the left mouse's room with water, and eventually when the right mouse saw them in danger, they opened the door. However, mice that had previously been on the left side and were now on the right, mice who had previously been wetted, opened the door considerably faster because they knew how unpleasant it was to be in the other scenario. Basically, mice have empathy. That's nice to know, but now I want an experiment where there are stakes, risks. I want there to be a moral dilemma in this situation for the mouse. What do you do, Mr. Mouse? Save the stranger with the cure for the entire mouse colony, or save your family? I just recently heard of blind-sightedness during one of my cognitive psychology classes. Basically, the area of the brain that processes what our eyes see is located at the back of the head, just where your skull starts to get smaller, towards your neck. Because of this, if you hit your head back there quite often, everything will go black for a moment before sight returns again. Sometimes, though, following severe trauma to this area of the brain, like after falling off a ladder onto a curb or something, a person is never able to see again. For a long time, it was assumed that the eyes were somehow incapable of seeing following the trauma, and that was why people were blind. However, it's been shown that it is just the processing of the images that is damaged. In other words, your eyes are still working away, viewing images, but your brain is unable to process the images, so you can't see them. Some experiments looking into this have found that people with damage to this area can still navigate around things in front of them without realizing they are doing it. So if you told someone with this damage to walk down a corridor and you placed obstacles in their way, they wouldn't be able to see the obstacles, but they could have a void bumping into them because their eyes are still able to view them and send signals to other areas of the brain to avoid knocking things. This is known as blind-sightedness. Blew my mind a little. And with that, you have ruined Daredevil forever. He's not really blind, he's just got blind-sightedness. To like the nth degree, I suppose.
One time I participated in a paid research experiment. I was basically tricked into thinking I was drunk. I was placed in a room with 2 other people, and we were instructed to drink vodka with cranberry juice over a period of time while we socialized. After we drank, I was placed in a room where I had to read some flashing words on a computer. I felt pretty drunk at this point. When the researcher came back into the room, he gave me my car keys and said I was never actually given alcohol. He briefly told me that because I was anticipating drinking for this experiment, that my brain had tricked me into feeling the effects of being intoxicated. I immediately snapped out of it and was completely amazed at how I felt. Solomon Ash's experiment on conformity. He set up a test wherein he would show 3 lines of different lengths to 5 or 6 individuals. I forgot the exact number, who had to state which line was the longest of the 3. The thing is, only the last individual is the participant and the others are actors paid to answer in a specific manner. For the first few questions, they chose the correct answer, but later on they start choosing the wrong one. The participants are conflicted as to whether they will say the correct answer or conform to the wrong answer as to not be judged by others or due to self-doubt of their own answers. In the end, most do conform. It's really interesting since it shows how powerful conformity is in the face of doubt, up to a point that some even question their own sanity during the test. Another variation of the experiment also had interesting results. It had the same setup with 5 individuals, with the last person being the participant. However, this time, some of the actors say the wrong answer while one actor says the correct one. There was an increase in participants who would choose the correct answer and avoid conformity. It shows how much doubt one can have on oneself when alone, but be brought back to self-confidence when they find outside support. Here's a twofer for you. So way back in the day, researchers examined the brains of cab drivers in London versus regular people via brain scanning. MRI, I believe, but I can't recall. They found that the cab drivers had cognitive advantages over regular people and also had a larger hippocampus, the area of the brain primarily involved in memory storage and recall. And just the other year, researchers investigated the effects of video games on cognitive decline. They had older people either play Mario 64 or Mario Galaxy, took virtual piano lessons, or they did nothing. This lasted 6 months. The researchers measured brain size before and after the experiment began. They also gave the participants a test on their short-term memory and cognitive functioning before and after the experiment as well. Mario group increased gray matter in the hippocampus and cerebellum, improved short-term memory and cognitive functioning. Piano group increased gray matter in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and cerebellum, no change in cognitive functioning. Control had no significant change. The authors believe that it was because the participants had to learn and navigate through a virtual world in order to beat the game that they wound up developing their short-term memory. The results were similar to those found in cab driver research. Mario doesn't provide players with an in-game map the way Call of Duty does, so they have to develop an internal cognitive map of the virtual world in order to get around it. Now, it's important to remember that the changes in cognitive functioning were very small to the extent that I would argue that they aren't actually meaningful, that the sample size in this experiment were very small, which would have skewed the results, and that it was very recent and still needs to be replicated. But the results to me are fascinating in that they suggest that certain video games may provide certain benefits to older people. I'd really like to see what happens if they had participants play the game for longer than 6 months, since realistically, gamers won't just play games for a 6-month period, they play for years. Man, Mario Galaxy is the bomb. I love that game so much. This is something I've been thinking about lately, actually. I hate the fact that some games nowadays don't have mini-maps. I mean, I used to be great with directions in video games, but I think over time I have gotten worse because of the constant use of mini-maps within video games. The Selective Laziness of Reasoning is an article I found and then partially replicated in my research methods class during my undergraduate. It's so great with a very interesting method and results that make you think about discussion and arguments a lot. Basically, the researchers presented participants with different syllogism, logic puzzles like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal, etc. And they asked them to provide their answers and also their reasoning for the answers. Later on, participants were asked to return and they presented some of their old answers, but the answers were reversed to be exactly what they had written down previously. But if their own argument from prior was presented as someone else's, they would disagree with it. Essentially, the lesson was we critically evaluate other people's arguments with much more focused lenses, and we afford ourselves less loopholes to jump through to validate and substantiate our own claims. Diet and behavior in children. Sugar and sweets don't make kids hyper. I love this one because it's so counterintuitive and every parent loves to tell you how their kid definitely does. Researchers took a bunch of parents and their kids and split them into two groups, those who get healthy fruit and those who get sugary sweets. The kids were separated from their parents for a moment and given the fruit or the sweets. A few minutes later, the parents were brought back in and either told the truth about what they'd been given or lied and told the opposite. The parents and kids were left by themselves with an assortment of toys, and the parents were asked to rate their kids' behavior. What they found is that irrespective of what they were actually given to eat, parents who were told their kids had sugary sweets reported worse behavior than those who were told they had fruit. Again, irrespective of what they actually had. The interesting thing is that when you actually looked at the kids' behavior, they really were misbehaving, generally being more inclined to screech, throw toys around, or ignore instructions. Turns out it's actually the parents' behavior that determines how the kids act. The same study has also been done with sugary drinks versus water, same result. Another interesting experiment is the Loftus experiment of fake memories and the power of suggestion. It's basically about implanting memories of events that have never taken place, or alter the subject's detailed memory of that event. You can quite easily test this in real life. Find a busy picture of a village, preferably cartoon and vividly colored, allow a test subject to inspect the picture for 20 to 30 seconds, and let them know that you'll be asking questions. Turn the picture face down and ask 2 to 3 questions about the contents of the picture, preferably easy to answer questions. Was there an X in the picture, or did Y happen? Also mix in a fake question there. For instance, the picture may have had a skyline but no sun. If you ask the subject whether the sun was yellow or orange, chances are that they will create a memory of a sun being visible in the picture and tell you a color. The Loftus experiment has been used to disqualify young children from giving testimonials in judicial proceedings, and follow-up experiments have included implanting memories of fake balloon rides and parents losing the subject in a mall as a toddler. It's quite fascinating. The last two stories have done nothing but inform me of one thing and one thing alone: children cannot be trusted. The elevator groupthink study, very amusing and sad at the same time. The experiment involved several actors entering an elevator with an oblivious participant. They then begin to perform a series of odd behaviors, such as they all stood facing the rear of the elevator. Inevitably, everyone else who got on ended up also facing the rear so as to not stand out from the rest. The study demonstrates how easily people succumb to group pressure to behave in a certain way. I don't think these ones are that good in that these events are happening in a vacuum in a very specific place. So if I saw everyone looking the back end of an elevator, for example, I would assume that maybe it's one of those elevators with 2 doors and that everyone else has used it before, especially if it's an elevator that I've never used before. If it's one that I had used before, I'd probably be stood there being like, what the hell is everyone doing? Research into where morality comes from. They asked people taboo questions like, a brother and a sister are alone in a cabin in the woods one night. They are both over 18 and decide to make love once, as they think it will strengthen their relationship. The sister is on birth control and the brother wears a condom just to be safe. Is this act wrong? Or another question was, a woman is cleaning her house and has no rags, so she finds an old American flag, tears it up, and uses it to clean her house. Is this act wrong? They created stories like this to give an initial reaction of disgust. They would then ask the participant to explain their answers. Most people couldn't give a good answer, only saying it feels wrong. They then went further and the interviewer would try their best to change the participant's mind, saying things like, well, no one saw, no one got hurt, etc., but participants wouldn't change their original response. The conclusion was that people make intuitive, emotional, split-second decisions all the time, and the reasoning, logical portion of the brain tries its best to explain the decision, but cannot change the initial decision. See The Rightful Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Subjects were tested for introvert versus extrovert personality types. Prediction was that when placed in a sensory deprivation chamber, the introverts would be able to handle it easily while the extroverts would not. Exactly the reverse was found. Introverts became agitated quickly and performed all manner of self-stimulation. Extroverts quickly went to sleep. What the findings showed was that it's introverts who are the sensation seekers, needing stimulation from the outside world. Extroverts create their own internal sensation and project that out to the world. Oh man. I'm such an introvert. Base rats. You probably know that if you drop a cat upside down that they'll right themselves and land on their feet. Rats have this reflex too. Even baby rats have this reflex. However, slower, which is tested by dropping them upside down in a tank of water. The baby rats will flip themselves upright as they float down through the water before they are scooped out and dried off. It was assumed that all reflexes are innately coded for in their genes. A group of researchers from the developmental psychobiology field didn't believe in this idea of innate reflexes. They believed that reflexes are learned through non-obvious experience. The researchers took a newly pregnant rat and sent her into space. The rat gestated the babies in space and was brought back to Earth just before giving birth. The baby rats were born on Earth in the lab. When the baby space rats were tested for the righting reflex, they didn't show it. They just floated through the water like they didn't know which way was down, because the baby rats didn't have experience with gravity in utero. They didn't learn about gravity and didn't develop the innate reflex. Therefore, other reflexes may be just as experience-driven as this one. Teachers, what do you know about your students that they think you don't know? I have never understood how students think if they lower their volume by 2 notches we suddenly become deaf. It's an enclosed space with 15 to 30 other people. If I don't hear it once, it will probably get repeated and I'll hear it again. I think the issue is students think we have so much on our plate with a lesson that we're in a whole other world. But really, this could be the 3rd or 4th time I've done this lesson this week, or even the 20th time in my career. When everything is basic rehearsal, you can zone out into other conversations pretty easily. I know who the loose girls are, the illegal substance dealers, the gang members, and when the fights are going to occur. I know each administrator has about 5 fake social media accounts and keeps tabs on what everyone is saying, and by Monday I will know what shenanigans you got up to over the weekend. I also know how to get out of going to the rally, which narc will look the other way and let you ditch class, and where people do the illegal substances on campus. I know that during lunch some have SX in the bathroom next door to my classroom, but they use protection. I've seen the used condoms on the floor, and by the end of the first month of school, I know when you're lying and I know when you've had a crappy night at home. I know who has crappy parents and who has no parents. I know of one of my students who sometimes sleeps on the park bench and a few who are abused. I know several who take care of their siblings. I know of learning disorders and mental disorders. I know how much you have the capacity to handle and know that math is not the most important thing in the world. My 8th graders call me Miss B because for some reason they can never remember or pronounce my full name. One of my classes has started calling me Miss Booty. When I hear them using it with each other, I pretend that I heard my name and ask if they need any assistance in the most chipper and obnoxious teacher voice possible. It's nice to see them jump when I respond. It's also nice to take a break from overhearing disgusting, prepubescent, school bathroom, counter, nasty business, bus ride, BJ horror stories by dropping in on the Pokemon conversations that spring up every now and then from the quiet kids that are probably even bigger weirdos. As the daughter of a teacher, you just learn things about students you never repeat, and you learn things about other teachers. My mom teaches special education, and she is bound to secrecy about everything, and she doesn't let up on it. But I hear other teachers talk about students like they're garbage. They talk about the parents, they even talk about each other. Teachers are the worst gossips. You want to hear some crap? Just stay after school. I teach at a public university. For something like 8 years, I've been sitting in on the first day of class every semester, quietly dressed like a student. Every now and then 1 or 2 of them catch on, but most of them are clueless. They start talking about how they haven't done the homework for the first day, or how they've looked me up on Rate My Professor, or why I'm such a tool and late on the first day. I hear about being high or drunk or hungover that morning. I usually wait about 10 minutes when they're thinking of leaving before I stand up and start class. Maybe it's because I'm English, but I've discovered how hard it is for me to say a word like start and then follow it up with class, start class. But rather I go start class because obviously they sound more similar. I only bring this up because I'm sure people have maybe noticed that sometimes I deviate between something like grass and grass, bath or bath, and start and class. God, I'm all tongue-tied now. Middle school teacher here. When you put your hand in front of your mouth to talk to whisper to a friend, I can tell, and your voice isn't nearly as quiet as you think it is, so I can hear what you're saying too. When you're staring at your crotch and giggling every once in a while, I know you're texting or on social media, but sometimes I don't say anything because that's the only time you're not disrupting the rest of the class. When I do take your phone away until the end of the day, I hand it over to the dean who checks all your texts and social media accounts you're logged into. We bust your friends by checking tracking who you're texting during school hours and email their teachers so they can just coincidentally notice their phone. When you're out for a family emergency for a week and come back with a tan and a tourist t-shirt, I know you're lying, especially when this is the third time in 2 years your grandmother has died. Seriously, please come up with something that doesn't insult my intelligence quite so much. You did understand your homework, you just didn't prioritize accomplishing it. The kids that didn't understand but tried used the 20 different tools I provided to assist you with it, and brought it to me before or at the beginning of class, not when I asked you to turn it in. Also, the dean and counselor fill me in on all your behavior and home issues. The nurse, who really is supposed to keep your medical issues private, is the biggest gossip in the school. Last of all, when you screw up and I have to call you on it, just acknowledge and or apologize. I don't want to reprimand you or correct you any more than you wanted, but it's part of my job. It's annoying to call your parents and fill out the paperwork when you screw up big. I won't turn it into a big deal unless you escalate it to a point that I have to do something about it. Well, based on the information that this person is giving, it sounds like this school has it on lockdown. I mean, it seems kind of invasive in some ways, but like they said, you're not supposed to have your phone out in class. I used to be in IT, but had a very messy divorce a couple of years back, and I now teach English in international schools in Japan. We all have school-issued computers with an integrated social network, and I can see all of the messages that the students send, even the private ones, to monitor online bullying, and I am not to let anyone know that I can see students' private messages. I got curious and started spying on them full-time. I learned about a couple of serious relationships between my class and one heterosexual and one homosexual, as well as learning that one of my students has a serious crush on me. Another came out of the closet, but everyone knew already, and then ended up dating a classmate. One girl went completely MIA, and all of us, including me, assumed she had deleted herself. I started getting strange emails about her death, but it turned out she had simply moved away, and all of the kids knew I was spying on them. I live and teach high school kids in a small town, and one of my students, just this total sweetheart, wonderful girl, is dating the scariest guy I have ever seen. Huge dude, lots of tattoos and piercings, way older than her, drives a souped-up deathmobile around town, that kind of thing. Just all around a sketchy guy. It's big school gossip. Everybody knows and talks about it all the time. This student definitely enjoys the attention and always drops hints about what a bad boy he is. Late one night, on a school night, I pulled into a convenience store parking lot to pick up a few things and notice his car there. They walk out of the store together and get back in the car with ice cream. He picked her up from school and bought her ice cream, and they were just sitting in his car being adorable and sweet. When I got out of my car to go to the store, I could hear that they were listening to show tunes. Best part, we ended up driving out of the parking lot at the same time, and the guy spotted me and gave me the friendliest hi ever. Don't judge a book by their cover, I suppose, but it's kind of worrying when kids in high school are dating people who are significantly older and not even in education anymore. I mean, heck, I remember one guy who got absolutely roasted when he was in year 11 because he was dating a year 7. So that's like, an 11 to 12-year-old dating a 16-year-old, which is definitely sketchy. Middle school teacher in a pretty rough school here. I know about their parents, illegal substances, unemployment, or legal problems from data our school is given, and from the parents outright telling me during phone calls or meetings. It's crazy and kind of trustworthy what the parents offer up to me. I've had them tell me, and the school counselor too, that so-and-so cousin was murdered in front of them last week, that's why they've been gone, or there's a lot of kids being bad touched. One kid I recall finally had enough and pulled a gun on his dad, after being molested for probably years. It's hard to get them to work diligently after that. I also can't tell certain kids that their moms, who probably are just a few years older than me, made a pass at me before they knew I wasn't single. I'm a swim instructor, and I know if my students play the piano. How? Well, they swim their front crawl with piano hands until I correct them. What are piano hands? Piano hands are when the index, middle, and ring fingers are together but the thumb and pinky are extended outward, a good habit for someone who might need to hit a high or low note. I also have a psych degree, and my understanding for why this happens is due to interference from similar neural substrates in the cerebellum. I also have had a student with flute hands, and my boss has hockey hands. You should see the look on my students' face when I tell them I know they play the piano. They think I'm psychic. I used to work as a substitute. I learned more than I ever wanted to about the kids I taught. More often than not, I wanted to switch from whatever lecture I was on to one about the concept of plausible deniability. You want to talk to your buddy about how much devil's lettuce you smoked and how many loose women you got with? Great, do it somewhere else. I'm required to inform security and the office about that stuff. Yes, I will still do it even if your cousin is a gangster and will pop a cap in me. Kids in juvenile detention schools just have no sense of plausible deniability. We'll call him Ted. We had a food drive last semester before Thanksgiving for about 2 months. We made a huge basket of canned food, things to make pies, stuffing, sides, bought a turkey, and as a staff voted for what students' family needed it the most. We all agreed that Ted's family, without question, needed it the most. A teacher had to pay for his uniform early on in the year. So he was told close to Thanksgiving by administration that someone would be delivering a basket to his house that afternoon. I guess he was overwhelmed and didn't ask questions then, because he came to my class and asked me, "Is that the food we've been raising for poor people?" I didn't know what to say. I said, "Some of it." "So was it a random thing that I'm getting the basket?" I knew what he was asking, so I said, "Oh my goodness, you won?" He acted surprised. I said, "Man, I'm jealous. They put a basket together with the food left over they didn't donate and picked one person from our program in a drawing and you must have won it." He was totally pumped. Before my class was over, I went to his next 4 classes and told the teachers to play along with the raffle story. They did. He doesn't know. Still a little annoyed that the admin told him. I feel like it could have been a left at the front door sort of thing. I love food drives and little stories like this. It really does warm my heart. The amount of crap I overhear is ridiculous. I know which of my students hosts all the parties and who made out and or hooked up with whom at said parties. I know who does the illegal substances. I know who does the illegal substances and doesn't think that the teachers know they do the illegal substances. I know that one of my students gives crappy BJs to a student in another one of my classes. I know who cheats on everything. Sometimes it's the goody two-shoes kid. I know that at least 3 students have agreed that they would totally tap that, meaning me. They think I'm oblivious. I have excellent hearing. Being a teacher, it would be really uncomfortable if students were just talking about what they'd want to do with you like that a lot. That would be really like, oof. I was a TA to the same teacher for 4 years in high school. I was really uptight at the time and asked her why she didn't mind when the same dude left class every single day with the pass for at least 20 minutes. My teacher said it was because he was making out with his girlfriend in the stairwell closet, and so help her God if I interrupted them because she was the best he was ever going to get. Teachers know your stuff, man. That teacher's a real one. Such a good wingman. I'm not currently teaching, but when I was a student teacher, what I was surprised to find out right away, and all you who are still in high school should know this, is how easy it is to tell when you're being lied to. I mean, teenagers are terrible at lying. I absolutely knew when I was being lied to. But here's the thing, kids. If they don't call you out on your lie, it's not because you succeeded in being convincing, it's because you're probably the 50th person that day to do so, and it's seriously just not worth the effort over something small. This one girl would ask to go to the bathroom almost every day to see her boyfriend who had a different lunch than she did. She'd usually be gone only 5 or 10 minutes, so I frequently let her do so. I used to do exactly the same thing in school, so I know how it is. She did her work, so she earned my discretion on that case. Pro tip, if you give, you get. Put in the effort and you will have bargaining chips. Also, I just want you guys who are still in school to know this. Your teachers know how to keep a professional distance, but they are not robots, and they are not blind. They see what's going on with you, and they care. I cried at least once a week over my students. I only taught for a short time, and now, 2 years later, I remember all my students' names, would recognize them on sight, and remember who made me cry. Oh, no, not that tactic. I always hate it when people don't, yell at you for doing something wrong, but they're just like, "I'm disappointed." And it's like, no, don't do this to me. That they're in gangs and which gangs they're in. Really, you asked to borrow a pen, but you don't want to write with the one I give you because it's blue? You can't sit in a blue chair, but you're not in a gang? Nah. It's actually really sad. I've only been teaching for 5.5 years, and 2 of my former students have already been killed in gang-related violence. Middle school ESL teacher here. For the first month, I didn't tell my students I spoke Spanish. I'm white. In that month, I heard more about my butt than I ever wanted to know. Also some gossip, love lives, hate for school, the usual. How did my students not know that I speak Spanish if I'm an ESL teacher? The majority of ESL teachers, i.e. American teachers in China, Japan, or other Asian countries, do not know the native language. The accepted practice for ESL instruction is called English immersion. It basically means that all class time will be in the desired required second language, in this case, English. ESL teachers use instructional methods such as TPR, fancy way of saying hand motions and body language, and other such methods to help level 1 students learn the basics. You'd be surprised how much you can learn by just pointing to things and saying the English word for it. How did I finally tell them? I did a class at the end of the month on the differences between English and Spanish. In Spanish, I just acted like nothing was different, asking questions in Spanish and instructing in Spanish. A more glorious feeling would be hard to find. How did they react? Jaws dropped, chaos ensued. Several students asked me if I spoke Spanish. I said in Spanish something like, "How could I speak Spanish? I'm a gringa." 2 students apologized after class for saying inappropriate things in class, and one particular vocal student ran out of the room and allegedly tossed his cookies in the bathroom. Hilarity ensued. Needless to say, I now have a great relationship with my students, and they know not to mess around when I'm in the room. I'm a high school teacher and have a class Twitter that my students can follow for homework updates, links to presentations, quizzes, etc. I told my students, don't ask me to follow you on Twitter because I won't. Not only do I not have the time to read your tweets, there are some things I just do not want to know. Your personal lives are one of them. I lied. After about 40 students followed, I went and snooped on every single one of their profiles and read all of their tweets. So much regret. So much. So what you're saying is you're a liar. One thing I know for sure is when my students are high. I've smoked quite a bit back in the day and therefore know all the symptoms and lingo. I totally mess around with them when they are stoned, not only because it is hilarious, but also in hopes to discourage them from smoking before coming to school. If I know it becomes a problem with any of them, then I will have the serious discussion about how you may not remember what you and your buddies talked about all those times when you were high, but you will sure as hell remember whether or not you passed my class. But for the most part, the stoners don't come to class too often and wait until after school. Teachers have huge amounts of access to students' information. We gossip, more than students do. We know everything. Who hooked up with who on camp, the weekend, in the holidays. We know about makeups, breakups, and everything in between. We know who smokes, we know who is doing the illegal substances, and who is getting up to mischief. We know kids' asexual and gender orientation, sometimes before they do. It's mostly just from listening in class. Kids seem to think that teachers can't hear personal conversations or that we don't pay any mind to them. We do. Working at a high school is like living on the set of a soap opera. I still can't believe how devastated I was when my favorite couple of 2012 broke up. It was torturous. You know what? I get it. You've probably not got much going on. You're just doing your work. And it's like, all the little bits of drama and whatever you hear is just a little bit of entertainment in the day to get you through work and keep you occupied, I guess. My boyfriend is an elementary school teacher, and he says that he knows way more about students' personal lives than they think. Like, their parents tell them their problems with poverty, immigration, and stuff. Meanwhile, some of the kids are like, I went to Cabo for summer break, or parents' private jet, and he's just like, awesome. Why don't you write a journal entry about it? As a student, I was close with the student teacher at the time. I liked a boy, and he told me not to go for him because he had gotten in trouble before with child smut and illegal substances. No idea how he knew that. That does sound like the kind of thing that people would need to be notified about. I mean, I know someone who actually worked in care, and they had to, they were offered the job to escort someone who had at one point molested a child, and because they were special needs, they needed someone to go with them to college. And this person in question, who I know, after being informed about what the dirty diddler did, they outright refused to do the job. I'm pretty sure something as severe as anything to do with children, a crime like that is going to be told to anyone that has to deal with them on a regular basis in a professional manner. When I teach undergrads, it's painfully obvious which ones are dating each other, even if it's a secret. I recently taught a required course for freshmen, and one of my students would give me outlandish excuses for not having been in class. He had a breakup, 2 dead relatives, and was flown across the world to save his family business, all in one semester. Oddly enough, his work was pretty good. I had to sit him down and explain that I really didn't care where he had been as long as he was showing up to reviews with completed projects, and that a long-winded explanation was unnecessary. The look on this teenager's face when I told him, I'm going to be out today, was perfectly reasonable, priceless. As for when I'm teaching graduate students, I definitely do know hardly any of you little buggers have read the material beyond a thesis statement, unless you're PhD students sitting in on a master's level seminar, and in that case, I do know that you love the sound of your own voice more than Frank Reynolds loved rum ham. So shut up, you're ruining the class for the people who actually need it. Inner city middle school teacher here. I know everything my students gossip about during class. No, not because I have supersonic teacher ears, as many of my students suspect. No, not because that smoke detector in the corner is actually a camera, as I convinced them of earlier this year. It's because kids can't whisper worth a damn. Also, privacy settings. Seriously, kids, use them. Not to mention, those kids I had in class 2 years ago who come by my classroom to visit and make small talk every day after school. Yeah, they keep me more in the loop than most of the students. Sometimes it pays to be the cool teacher. But how sad it is when the cool teacher eventually grows up or gets promoted and then becomes the regular teacher. I understand your jokes, I just pretend that I don't. When I was a student, I would marvel at how my teachers could fail to understand the brilliant asexual innuendo I would use that would have my classmates snickering while they, the instructor, looked on without comprehending. Now I hear 18-year-old girls in my class make the same kinds of comments, and as a 36-year-old dude, my brain immediately begins flashing warning lights and sirens. So I play really dumb because I'm just not going to go there. And that is probably, honestly, for the best. High school teacher here. Regarding students' personal lives, it's very much a need-to-know basis. I don't really give a damn that you party on the weekends, get high after school with your buddies, or anything like that. The thing is that as teachers, we are mandated reporters for a lot of things. The less you know about stuff like that, the better. No teacher snoops Facebook for this very reason. If I see a student ripping a bong on their profile picture, I have to do something about it. That and perusing Facebooks of 14 to 18-year-olds is creepy as hell. What I do know is the stuff I think is necessary. Which students come from disadvantaged backgrounds, who comes from a two-parent home, behavior and academic histories. The last thing you want to do is call home. A woman answers the phone and you assume it's a kid's mom when it's their sister who doubles as their primary caretaker. You don't want to tell kids that they should go on the school field trip and they come from a very low-income home. A lot of kids probably assume teachers don't know stuff like this, but most of us go out of our way to make sure they do. I also know which teacher's classes you're a butthole in. You don't really want to say anything about that to the kid either, because frankly, some teachers are buttholes and they have it coming. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.